The candle flame leaned toward the open lattice, troubled by the sea breeze that found its way even this deep within the Red Keep. The chamber smelled of tallow and old wood and the faint salt of the bay. Eddard Stark sat in the chair beside the bed and watched the wick gutter, listened to the susurrus of the city far below as it began to stir toward dawn. There were 1,000 small sounds when the rest of the world grew quiet. The rope creak of a lantern on a watchtower battlement, gulls worrying at the eaves, the drip that counted itself out from the stone cistern behind the wall. He had grown up with the soft winter music of the north. Ice caressing a riverbank, snow sifting against shutters, wind combing through the old pines, and this place, with its heat and odors and restless murmuring, still felt like a strange house whose corners had not yet learned his name. He did not look at the parchment on the table because he had read the words enough times to carve them into the grain. The ink had blotted when Robert's hand shook. The wax was cracked and Robert's stag lay broken across the seal, and the words themselves were heavy as an axe head. It was a simple thing, that writing. It made him protector of the realm until the rightful heir came of age. It named his duty with the same easy certainty his father's voice had once named it, in those brief days before war turned everything into dust. Jon Arryn would have known how to turn these words into a shield that could not be broken. Ned thought of his foster father and felt again the small, gruff kindnesses of a man who had made his childhood into something more than a list of hard lessons. Robert had loved Jon, and in his rough king's fashion had tried to love the realm too. He had not been made for kingship. He had been made to ride and laugh and hunt and drink and break sieges with a hammer in his fist. He had died as he had lived, in motion and heedless and loud, blood on boar tusk and breath sweet with strong wine, and the realm had the bill to pay for it now. Ned had accepted a winter's number of bitter things since he had come south. None sat so bitter on the tongue as grief. The dead did not hear what you said to them, however honest. They did not answer however you called. He had sent Ser Barristan from the room after a time, and Pycelle with him. If there was wisdom in old age, it lived somewhere far from the Grand Maester's trembling eyelids, and the way his fingers stroked any paper that came near him. Varys had drifted in as shadows do, making himself both foolish and dangerous in his careful, soft speech. Littlefinger had made a jest delicate as a dagger. Renly had smiled with his handsome teeth, and the smile had not reached his eyes. He heard the sound again now, soft knuckles on the door at a measured pace that kept both urgency and presumption leashed. Tomard opened for the visitor. Tomard, who was not so fat any longer, the heat and stress having melted him down to his bones. Renly slid through, bright as a summer day, green silk loose at the throat and a pin of antlers at his collar, hair perfect and the faintest sheen of sweat at his temples. Dawn painted a pale bar across his cheek. "Forgive me, my lord," Renly said. "For the hour, the city pours like porridge, slowly, but it pours all the same. I thought you should know which bowl it is running into." Ned rose slowly because of the leg. The splints made a quiet click beneath the linen of his trousers. He distrusted his cane and hated to be seen with it. He took it anyway. Renly's eyes slid to the stick and away. "Speak plain," Ned said. He had long since stopped asking courtiers for anything else. "Is it to be Joffrey?" "It is to be Cersei, which is the same thing," Renly answered, and came to the table where Robert's seal lay like a wound. He looked down without touching. "She means to have the boy crowned at midday. She has made a list for Ser Janos Slynt, and he has bowed so deeply he may have broken his neck. The city watch will keep their spears with hers. The Lannister guards are all arrayed in their crimson best on the steps of the throne room. She sent for the High Septon at first light." "She sent for him?" Ned repeated, and felt heat rise behind his ribs. Anger had the same taste as fear to him, copper and old iron. "She has no right to call that man to crown any but the king's choice and the laws. She thinks law a veil to pull over her face when someone brings a mirror. She has Pycelle. She has Lord Peter making sums that end in her favor." Renly's tone made the last name a sibilant thing. "She has a child, and a mother's heart to wave at men like a banner. The small folk love children. They breed them like stray cats, and they cannot bear to see one treated without tenderness. She will stand on the steps and weep while they cheer. If there is blood, it will be yours." Ned had slept little, and what sleep he'd had been snared by dreams he did not wish to revisit. The leg ached and the day seemed too heavy to lift. But weight had never kept him from moving. He had carried bodies heavier than this. The king's letter. He laid his hand on the parchment to feel again its roughness and the grim life in it. "Robert made me protector. I will not turn that burden over to the queen, nor to any man who thinks himself favored by her smile. I sent ravens to Dragonstone for Lord Stannis. This letter names him heir in everything that matters. If he is what I judged him, he will come. Law needs a face and a sword." Renly's mouth twitched. "Stannis is iron, I grant you, but iron sinks. He will not float this city. Brother Stannis will arrive bristling with righteousness after someone has crowned the boy. By then he will have to pry a crown from Joffrey's head with a knife. You have no season for patience, my lord. What would you have of me? Do what you were born to do," Renly said, and there was a flash of something like admiration in him. "Take the steps between law and life. Do not wait to be given leave by those who have never honored it. Arrest the queen, you mean? Keep her and the two youngest close, for their safety as well as your own. With Myrcella and Tommen, the lioness will show us her claws, but keep them sheathed. Leave Joffrey to me. He is too thorny for your particular honor, and you need your hands clean for when you show the letter." Ned heard the quiet calculation, the edge where help became ambition. He heard also what truth was in it. Robert had once said Renly was as pretty as a girl and almost as clever. The pretty had hardened since Ned last saw him at Storm's End. The clever had learned to hold its tongue until it could bite. Renly's plan had rib bones and would stand. But it was a cat's grace, not a hound's. "You came to me with this yesterday," Ned said. "I told you then that children would not be harmed under my protection." Renly's smile sharpened. "You mistake me if you think harm is my object. I will carry the boy to a chamber and sit him down in a chair and set a sober man before him to speak of bedtimes and the mercy of the gods. I will even fetch him a sweetmeat if he cries. But I will not let the queen place him on a throne with his mother's hand up his back. It must be you who sits where you do not wish to sit, Eddard Stark. Else we will all be dancing to the queen's tune before the candles are lit for evensong." Ned looked at the window lattice and the gray-blue smear beyond it where sky touched water. He thought of his daughters, Sansa's quiet diligence and Arya's splay-handed delight in disobeying the world. He thought of Robb far away and of Bran learning to climb without his legs and of Rickon, still small enough to creep beneath the tables and stare at people's boots as if they told futures. He thought, finally, as he often did at the cusp of any decision, of his father's words. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Duty was a dull word, but it was the weight that kept a blade from veering wild. "Very well," Ned said. The words had a great weariness in them and a kind of relief. "I will not leave that hall to anyone else. Bring whom you trust, who can be trusted not to turn this to your glory. Loras Tyrell comes trailing his house in flowers. I do not want blooms scattered at the foot of a throne. The city is starving for bread, not petals." Renly inclined himself as if accepting a jewel. "As you say, Lord Protector, Ser Barristan will stand for the Kingsguard as the law demands," Ned said. "Ser Mandon and Ser Boros and Ser Meryn will do as they're told by their bellies. The Hound is the Hound. Do not count on him. Count on his contempt for fools." "And Peter?" Renly asked. "I will not be surprised by Lord Peter Baelish twice," Ned answered. "He will not stand in the hall." When Renly had slipped away, the chamber gathered the silence Renly's presence had scattered. Ned took a breath, then another, as he drove his heels into the floor and stood again. Tomard watched him without speaking. The men Ned had left were the hard core of what he'd brought south, leached of laughter and numbers both. Jory's absence threw a shadow as long as a winter day. "Wake Varley," Ned said. "Desmond too. And Will. Send Will to the barracks. Have the household guard eat hot and drink little and gather their wits. No armor that sings when you walk. Tell them we go to the throne room. Tell them we go for the king's will. If you cannot trust them not to speak foolishly before anyone they meet on the way, send them to the kitchens and have them peel onions until noon." Tomard nodded and went. He moved faster now than he had a month ago and made less noise. Ned went to the door that opened into the little inner chamber where a basin stood and a pitcher sat heavy with water beaded along its clay shoulder. He washed his hands and face with methodical care, as though he could scrub the night and the city and his doubts from the lines near his mouth. When he wiped his beard using the rough linen, he felt, bizarrely, almost like a younger man. It was not strength. It was readiness, a thing colder than strength and more honest. He dressed in black, linen under leather, the white dire wolf of Stark subtle at his breast as if it had been sewn there by shy fingers. He took up Ice's little brother, the sword that traveled with him in the south, good northern steel but not the great ancient weight of his house's Valyrian. The leg would not bear that other weight today. He buckled on the blade and felt its familiar snug anger at his hip. The cane he took last. Septa Mordane arrived with Sansa and Arya clinging to her flanks like mismatched kittens. Sansa had slept and had tears on her cheeks, dried in little paths that caught at the light so that she seemed jeweled. Arya had not slept at all from the look of her, and her eyes were bright with speed. She had needles slung at her hip, and the Septa's mouth was a string pulled tight. "You will not take knives into the throne room," Ned told Arya. He did not raise his voice. Her mouth opened, then shut. She put both hands behind her back as if he could not see them and wriggled her shoulders. His heart hurt. He did not smile. "You will stay in this chamber with the Septa and with Varley and 3 men who have no love for Lannisters. If anyone comes with orders, they are to be brought to me first. We shall leave this city before nightfall if we do not succeed." "You always say we will not run," Arya said, with a fury that made her small fists tremble. "We do not run," he said. "Sometimes we move wisely. There is a difference." Sansa stepped forward and put her hand on his sleeve, and he remembered how Bran had been at that age with his solemn face and the way he would speak once and be silent until he knew he had understood. "Will they listen?" she asked. "Will the Queen listen?" "They will listen to the law," he said. It was the answer he had for himself as well. He bent and kissed the top of each head, Sansa's hair sweet and smooth with the oils the Septa had rubbed into it, Arya's a wild scrub that smelled of wind and sweat and stubbornness. "If they do not, I will make them hear." Ser Barristan came when Ned sent for him, white cloak immaculate, face grave. There was care in those old eyes. He had endured 3 kings, and Ned wondered not for the first time what that cost. The Kingslayer was not in the city. That absence was a silent bell that tolled and tolled. Barristan bowed but not low. It was the bow of a man who would bend to law and nothing else. "The king," Barristan said carefully, "is dead." "Robert is dead," Ned corrected. It was not pedantry. Names mattered. They were a kind of magic that bound the world to meaning. "This letter is his last command. Will you stand with me when I read it from the Iron Throne?" Barristan leaned down. He did not touch the parchment. He read with his eyes, that old soldier's stare that saw to the bottom of men. When he raised his head, his jaw had set. "I served Ares until he went mad in the field, and he would have burned a city to feed what scorpions danced in his skull. I served Robert as he drank himself to death and spent gold as if he could swing it like his hammer. I will not serve a queen who crowns her son out of her own temper. I will serve the law, Lord Stark. I will stand." "Then we are enough to begin," Ned said. They went in a tight coil, the men of Winterfell and the old knight like the spine of a dragon. The keep's corridors were as unnerving as a maze even now. Half the city seemed to live in them, and yet you could pass an hour and meet no one but a servant with his eyes trained on the floor. Sun had not yet made anything sharp. The sky was a smear of milk, and the torches burned still on the walls, though they did little but spit and whiter the air. In the yard, the city watch were mustering, their kettle helms a dull pebbled line. Ser Janos, thick-necked and sullenly satisfied, leaned on a spear and looked at Ned with a bland civility. "The watch is at the service of the new king, my lord," he said, and rolled his shoulders as if to settle the weight of an invisible cloak about himself. "Your oath is to the city and the law," Ned told him. "This letter will be read in the throne room. I expect the watch to stand ready to keep order and to obey the commands of the Protector." He did not show the letter. He did not need to. Slint would already have heard of it and turned it over like a burning coal in his palm and decided it would warm or burn him depending on the wind. Slint did not argue. He looked beyond Ned at the men from the north and at Barristan's white cloak, and he looked at the 3 wagons that had trundled into the yard at dawn heavy with oat bread and dried fish. Ned had ordered them himself for the commons outside the Red Keep. He had done it for the sake of calm and because hunger sharpened every emotion but mercy. Slint's small eyes counted. He gave Ned the bow he had not wasted on the king's bed in the night. "As my lord says," he answered. But he was a man who smelled which way meat was turning and would sell from either end of the stall. Ned did not trust him a finger's width. Varys found Ned on the last stair before the great doors that opened into the throne room. He seemed never to have grown a breathless habit, coming up all those steps smooth as poured oil. "How like winter you are, Lord Stark," Varys murmured, and his perfumed hands flitted, one white moth beating itself against another. One does not know if one should look for shelter or stride into it earnestly and hope to come out the other side with one's extremities intact. "If you came to tie a riddle around my neck," Ned said, "save yourself the silk. But riddle silk is what holds a kingdom together." Varys's eyes flicked to the men arrayed with Ned and to Barristan. He made a little moo with his lips. "Renly is moving." Loras and a handful of green-fletched spears went out through the painted table gate a short time ago. "He has taken the boy, gently I am certain. Such hands those Tyrells have. One wonders where they learned to run them." "What of the queen?" Ned asked. "Sleeping as cats will, upon the warm coal of her own plans. She will wake to find a little ash on her pillow." He sighed, and it was almost sincere. "Do not mistake me, Lord Stark. I find children sweet and women very often sour, but I have a soft spot for quiet. If noise is prevented by a boy's nap, I am content to guard the door while he dreams." "You are content to guard the door while anyone dreams," Ned said. "You are a keeper of doors, and you are a man who opens them. We make a house, do we not?" They made a doorway of themselves and passed through the great bronze doors into the cavernous hall. The iron throne squatted upon its dais like a bad thought given a body. It looked ridiculous and somehow still threatening in that washed light, the blades blunted by the look of them and yet like an old cleaner who knew where every sharp corner lived. Ned had never loved the thing. He thought of the high seat at Winterfell carved long ago from timber that had known the winters of 100 years. That seat was dark and patient, shaped by hand, and old men slept in it at feasts. This thing was the color of old blood. People bled themselves around it and thought themselves sanctified. Ned mounted the steps with the cane in his left hand and the letter in his right. The leg bit twice on the way and he made no sound. Barristan stood just to his right as if he would catch him if he slipped. He would not need to. Ned did not slip. The hall filled as they had known it would. The Kingsguard came in their white cloaks, doublets as clean as bone. Its lesser men came with their tapestries of crimson and gold. Guards clinked in clusters, breath making steam where the hall held a pocket of last night's cool. Py. Sel shuffled with a scroll clutched to his chest as though it might flee. Littlefinger arrived late and unruffled, a wisp of mint on his breath and a smirk tucked neatly into the corner of his mouth. He placed himself at the edge of the hall like a man who liked the vantage one gains from observing without responsibility. Varys had disappeared. Word moved through bodies like wind through aspen leaves when Cersei Lannister came. She wore green, not Lannister red, and Ned admired the thought that went into the choice even as he loathed the woman who had made it. The dress made her hair into a torch. She carried Joffrey by the hand, and the boy had been dressed in a tunic stiff with seed pearls. He looked older for the clothes and the shiver in him. Tommen and Myrcella trailed. The hound stalked a pace behind, expression carved in contempt, eyes empty of anything a man might wish to find in them. Cersei did not look at Ned as she came up the aisle. She looked at the throne with something that glittered like hunger and hate combined, and when she looked away at last it was to look at the crowd. She did not look at her son's hand where his fingers had gone white around hers. The high septon, fat in his shell of richness, made a place beside the dais as if he had been born there. Cersei lifted her chin. "Ser Barristan," she said, "I will have the boy sit. Announce your king." Barristan did not move. He did not look at her. He looked at Ned, and then he looked straight ahead so that his gaze might slice the hall in two and neither half would claim it. "Your Grace," he said to the heir. "The king's hand stands as protector of the realm with the late king's writ in his possession." Cersei smiled a small smile. "Kings have hands so that they may be spared the pain of using their own. My son needs no hand to sit where he belongs. Ser Janos." The gold cloaks had come, 20 of them, and stood with their spears bristling like an ill-kept hedgerow. Slint's likeness of a smile bled across his face. He put his fingers to his lip and gave a shrill whistle as if calling some dog. "Here," Ned said, and his voice carried without effort because he spoke as he would to men on a winter road, steady and pitched to be heard above the wind. He lifted the parchment. The late King Robert Baratheon, first of his name, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, set his seal to this writ in the last hours of his life. He names me Protector until the rightful heir comes of age. I have sent for Lord Stannis Baratheon to come to King's Landing so that the realm may know its king. Until that time, I will defend the peace and the law." He did not look at Cersei as he read. He looked at Barristan. He looked at the men he had brought south and at the men who stood with him now only because it appeared the path of least blood. He looked at the hound who appeared bored. He looked at Joffrey and saw the boy's jaw tighten and his mouth open to some insult or command. "Bastard," Joffrey said, and his voice cracked. He had a child's rage and a cruel boy's sense that if he said something hard enough it would make it so. "Usurper's dog. My mother says you are not even a man. I will have your head and mount it on." Cersei's hand tightened once upon his and then let go. "The hand forgets himself," she said, her voice low and shaped by scorn. "He forgets that the king is in the hall." Ned lowered the parchment. For a heartbeat the hall was aloom, everything strung tight and waiting for the shuttle to begin. "There is no king in the hall," he said. "There is a boy. There is a woman with more pride than sense. And there is the law. It is heavy. You will not lift it with a lie." Cersei laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was not even a human sound. "You are a northern fool," she said. "You think men love the law? Men love a show. They will kiss the hand that gives them bread and a spectacle. I will have both, and I will be kinder than you, Wolfman, because I will let others do the ugly things and be adored for what remains." "Ser Janos," Ned said without looking at Slint. "Take 20 men. Escort the Lady Cersei to the Maiden Vault. She will be comfortable there with her daughter. Escort Prince Tommen to the Tower of the Hand. He will be comfortable there with bread and books. Bring the boy Joffrey to the council chamber and wait with him. He will be comfortable there with silence." Slint opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at Cersei. It was all the time Ned had expected it to take. He lifted his hand and brought it down. It was a small gesture, but Jonas, a hard little man who had guarded Ned's life in alleys and on roads, and in a city whose streets did not know his name, stepped forward with 6 others and put their swords casually across the throats of the foremost gold cloaks. Desmond walked by Slint as if passing a friend and took the spear from his hand. The King's Guard moved then, their white cloaks shifting, but Barristan's hand went out and became a line across a page. He did not touch them. He did not need to. He was Barristan the Bold, and in him the old legend stirred and sat up for a breath. "Do not," Barristan said. "For the honor of your cloaks, do not." The hound chuckled, and the sound of it was ugly and honest. "I will see where this goes," he said to no one in particular, as if he had been offered a dogfight and thought he might be entertained. Cersei's mouth drew tight. She flicked a glance behind her, measuring men and mood, and had the wit to see that she had brought fewer of the second than she had imagined. "Do not presume to imprison me," she said, but there was less steel in it and more glass. "I will presume nothing," Ned told her. I will act. 2 of the northern men stepped to her flanks. They did not touch her. They did not need to. Men obeyed what they could see. She moved because not moving would have broken the spell she was weaving over her own courage. Mercil. Elle's eyes were wide and frightened. Tommen had turned the color of tallow. Joffrey jerked his hand out of his mother's and stood where he was, his throat working. This is treason, he said, and the word, put into his mouth by another, was too big for it. It came out sounding like a curse he had learned to say to make girls flinch. This is law, Ned said softly. I swore it to your father and to the fathers before him. Walk where I told you. Joffrey did not. He stood yet, looking about as if for a cue. The Kingsguard did not move. The High Septon held his breath like a diver. Janos Slynt had the dullest expression Ned had ever seen on any face. It had the nakedness of calculation stripped of everything that made it human. Varys had come again into the hall and stood near a pillar, hands folded, and if he had been wearing a mask it could not have covered him any better. Littlefinger had the same tilted half-smile, the corner of it up and the other down, as if he half expected to see a man slip on a polished step and wished to be amused and concerned in equal measure. Ser Meryn, Cersei said sharply, at the same moment as Ned said, Barristan. Meryn Trant moved to the boy. Barristan moved to meet him, and though neither man drew his blade, yet the hall felt the shift as a horse feels his rider's seat tighten before the gallop. Meryn was a heavy man in heavy way. Barristan moved like a man at morning prayer. He planted himself between boy and throne. Meryn stopped because there were rules even for fools. The Protector has the king's writ, Barristan said, and it sounded like the world was old, very old, and had seen many such things and would see them all again. Ser Meryn, you will do nothing until the writ is settled. Meryn was slow, but he was not entirely without sense. He looked at Cersei and then at the Hound, who looked at his nails, and at Slynt, who looked at his shoes. He stood as if rooted. Enough, Cersei said, but it did not carry. Take them, Ned said. What followed had a terrible simplicity. Cersei turned and walked up the aisle, Myrcella's hand now caught in hers like a prize. Tommen was guided by a man with a scar of childhood pox across his cheek. Joffrey's face was red and his eyes brimmed with tears he wouldn't let fall, and for a moment Ned thought, as he had not allowed himself to before, that he was no one's son who deserved a throne. He was a child who had been raised to believe that the world would love him because he thought it should. When they were gone and a kind of breath moved around the hall as though it could at last draw one, Ned turned his head to find Petyr Baelish watching him with an expression that, for once, he could not name. There was a crease at the edge of Petyr's mouth that could have been worry or calculation. It did not matter. Lord Petyr, Ned said, you will walk with me. Always a pleasure, my lord. Littlefinger answered lightly, but he did not look as though pleasure had any part in it. He came up beside Ned as if they were old friends and leaned in until his breath touched Ned's ear. You have just seized children and thrown a queen into a comb. The realm will hum. Do you have honey? Bread, Ned said. Oh, Petyr said in a different voice, as if he had been told a joke in a language he half understood. Bread is uglier than honey, but it keeps men alive long enough to see sense. Bread and the law, Ned said. He did not tell him that he would have liked honey too. They left the hall by a door the northern men sealed behind them with their shoulders. The corridors grew closer as they walked, less light finding its way in, the stones laid in some other time. Littlefinger walked beside him with a dancer's poise and made no clack of heel upon stone. There was a time, Petyr remarked, when I watched you with Catelyn Tully across the Sept Isle and thought to myself, here is a man the world will not bend. I was not wrong, but I was unprepared for the creative ways you would use to keep from bending. The queen will stretch you on a rack made of rumor and quiet poison. Not if she is locked in a tower, Ned said, and not if her father must come to the city to negotiate the safety of his blood. Tywin Lannister does not negotiate unless negotiating is the way one wins, Petyr said. He will come. First, he will send a little fire to see what will burn. Then we will not be dry tinder, Ned answered. Leave off your riddles for a day, Peter. I will tell you what I require. You will go to the counting house. You will open the vaults. You will bring me not promises but coin. I will pay the city watch with silver they can chew between their teeth. I will buy grain. I will pay the butchers. I will make common cause with the men of the city because they will see their wives' hands oily with fat and their children asleep with full bellies. You will take what the happy porters ask for their wagons and pay it. And you will, if you like, calculate the profit of a city that does not burn upon you like a fine cloak. Littlefinger blinked once. It was the first honest reaction Ned had enjoyed since he had come south, and he savored it in a small practical way. Then Peter smiled again, all lightness and mockery returning to him like a mask found on a shelf. As you wish, he said. I will go count your coins for you, my Lord Protector. And while I count them, I will consider how the realm has given itself a king in all but name, who thinks good government a matter of bread and paying one's bills. The gods must be drunk. Let them sober when the work is done, Ned said, and turned away because there was too much yet for one man to do and his leg would carry him only so far. And Peter, if I learn that you have been speaking to Ser Janos in any language but that of my will, I will have you placed in the same tower as the queen, without the advantage of her daughter's company. Peter's eyes grew flat a moment, then quick and glittering again. You will find me surprisingly obedient when the sticks you promise are so handsomely carved, he said. He bowed and went. By midday, the city knew what had happened. Ned felt it in the way the noise rose and fell just beyond the walls, the way it entered the halls like wind through a poorly fitted door. Wagons came and went, men carrying sacks like sleeping children over their shoulders, and Janos Slint, watching, counted again with his small pebbled eyes. Varys drifted by now and then and made small reports in his lisping way. Renly had taken Joffrey to a chamber and posted Loras outside of it, and there was a little comedy in the way the boy tried to order the Knight of Flowers to fetch him this and that and discovered that smiles do nothing against a man who has decided to be granted. Cersei raged in her tower and made her schemes. Ned could almost hear them hatching, sleek red-backed things that would flee for crevices when light was cast on them. He sent ravens. He sent one to Dragonstone and wrote upon it with a care that made his hand ache, in a script that said plainly, Robb could read this if it fell into his hands and know what I did and why. He summoned Stannis Baratheon as lord and as rightful heir and asked him to come to the city to take up the crown for the realm's sake. He wrote to Mace Tyrell in a voice that stroked his pride and told him plainly that the Reach's bread and ships would make him a god to the commons and a savior to men at court. He wrote to Hoster Tully, though his father-by-law's hand had grown shaky, and in the letter there were more herbs than sentences and a plea that Catelyn might be sent to him because he remembered that in the coldest times of his life laying his hand upon hers had warmed him. He wrote to Lysa, though he expected nothing but fear in return. He wrote to Doran Martell, a letter of old grief and justice promised, and to Balon Greyjoy a note that might as well have been a stone dropped into deep water. He wrote to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch as well, and had the oddest sense of the world rounding in on itself as he did so. A little premonition like the chill one feels at the back of the neck before a storm. Winter is coming, he wrote, and went still for a breath at the sadness of writing his house's words as if they were a thing to be explained. The king has died, and there will be much foolishness in the south before there is any wisdom. I wish to send men and grain north. The realm is yours in this as much as it is mine. The small council convened in the cool of afternoon. The table was as round as a coin and as hard. Varys glided to his seat. Pycelle wheezed his way into his. Peter arrived last and took the chair that allowed him the view he preferred. Stacks of parchment crowded the table and spilled like fallen leaves. Outside the window, sunlight struck off the bay and made the water look like a plate hammered by some kindly god. We have a little time, Varys said as delicately as one might speak of a candle stub. The lion will gather himself. He will not roar until he has made certain the sound will carry far. Meanwhile, the storm comes over the sea. Lord Stannis has answered many letters with silence. He will answer this one perhaps with a fleet. Good, Ned said. Let him answer with swords if he must. We will meet him with law. Forgive me, Pycelle puffed, But the law is a very flexible garment. It can be made to stretch, oh yes, or to constrict. He rolled the word in his mouth. He had always looked to Ned like a worm that had learned to mimic the look of a man, old and burrowed, with the light gone from him long ago. The law is iron where it must be, Ned said. Robert's letter, do not think it a small thing. It is parchment, Peter said brightly. Parchment can be burned, or drowned, or used to wrap fish if one has more fish than appetite. And yet men fight and die for what is written on it, Ned answered, because they need a world that means something. And others fight and die because someone says their name very loudly from a dais. Littlefinger returned. I will do as you asked, my lord. The granaries will open. I have already sent word to the port toll collectors to grease their hands for the barges rather than their bellies for themselves. The price of bread will drop. The people will gossip that a man with a long face and a long sword sits where he should and is less inclined to kiss babies than to slap the knuckles of men who cheat them in the market. He looked amused. The people will like you for that. For now. Ned did not concern himself with later. Later would come as it always did, sometimes wearing a cloak of regret, sometimes wearing blessing. We will hold a great council, he said, here in the city. We will call every lord whose oath binds him to the crown, great and small, from the mander to the neck and from the fingers to Sunspear. The matter of succession will be settled in the sight of any man who wishes to see. Until then, we do not name a king, and we do not allow any man to wear a crown who has no right to it. What of the boy? Varys asked, and it did not sound like mockery. It sounded like the single pure inquiry of a man who liked to place things in their proper boxes. Joffrey will be treated as befits a lord's son, Ned said. He will be given food and teaching in time. He will not be allowed to command men or to speak what is not sanctioned by his guardians. He will not be paraded. He is a boy. Your mercy will look like weakness, Peter murmured. Let it, Ned said. The strong man who knows mercy is stronger than the brute who has never seen anything but his own fist. Renly did not come to the council. He sent word that he had work in hand. The word came via Loras Tyrell, who smiled and placed the scrap of paper on the table as one would place a flower. Ned glanced at it and slid it toward Varys without reading. It would be a list of men with names that smelled of the Reach. It would be a plan that was not for today. He could see through it without looking. When he left the council, the sun had fallen to the edge of the bay and the city had taken on its gold and red. Smoke hung as a veil over the slums and the chimneys painted the sky with their stains. It was a pretty sight if one did not look at it with the eye one reserved for the work to be done beneath it. Barristan met him in the corridor outside the rooms he had taken for Cersei. She asks for you? The old knight said, and there was something like pity in him and something like curiosity. Barristan was a sword that felt questions and still spoke in cuts. She may ask, Ned said, and then, with a breath, I will go. He went without his cane. It was a risk. He did not like to look weaker than he had to in front of certain people. But he did not bring the cane because he would not have a weapon in his hands when he spoke to a mother about her children, whether that mother deserved compassion or not. The room was overclean. There is a certain kind of cleanliness that makes a place feel more like a cell than filth ever could. The jugs were lined in a way that was almost pathetic. Cersei stood near the hearth that had been lit against the night. She had stripped off the green and wore simple linen, and it made her no less beautiful and no more human. Myrcella sat on a chair with a book in her lap and peered over the edge in that dreamy way of hers. Tommen was asleep, his mouth open slightly, his hand curled, a child. When Cersei looked at him, she became, briefly, something warmer, as if the fire behind her had touched her skin. You disgrace your house and your vows with this, she said without preamble. You think yourself a hero of stories. You are a butcher. Tell me a story, Ned said gently. Tell me the one where the realm bleeds less. You could have bowed. You could have taken your northern honor home and let men play their games here as they always have. Let my son be crowned and then teach him. Men are manageable. Boys are obedient when handled cleverly. "I will not teach a boy a lie and tell him it is a crown," he said. "He would grow into it, and then the heads that fall would be mine." Her mouth twitched in contempt. "You know nothing of kingship." "I know enough to know that if it does not rest on law, it rests on fear," Ned said. "And fear breaks men as surely as ice breaks a river in spring." She came closer. Her perfume was subtle, something like orange blossom and something sharper beneath, the smell of a blade rubbed with oil. "Call your council. Bring your swarm of toad-eating lords to bray in a circle. My father will come when he chooses to come and not a moment before. When he arrives, he will not speak to you. He will speak to the city. He will speak in the coin he has hoarded and in the soldiers he commands and in the way he can make the fear in men's bellies dance like puppets. And while you are counting votes in the dragon pit, he will be counting coffins. And then," Ned said, "he will see that his daughter and his grandson are alive and he will weigh them, and he will be tempted to lay down his sword and take up his purse to make a settlement. He loves his blood the way he loves his gold." She laughed again. It was a terrible sound. "He loves victory. He does not care in what coin it is paid. Then perhaps he is tired of paying in the coin he has chosen. The realm is better when he is not burning out villages to prove to himself he can. If he has that wisdom in him, I will find it. You will not live to find anything," she hissed suddenly, and the mask snapped and the fear beneath it bared its teeth. "You think your north will save you? You think the fish will wade out of their muddy river to pull you from the mud? I will burn you in your bed. I will send men who will put a pillow over your face. I will—" She stopped herself. She had said too much to a man who listened. "I will leave you now," Ned said. "You will have food and books. If you wish to pray, I will send the septon. If you wish to counsel with your brother, you will not. Your children will be safe as your behavior allows it." He turned and went before the heat in her eyes could scorch him, before the pity he felt for her despite himself could become something he would regret. Barristan said nothing when Ned came out. Men stood along the corridor. They had learned not to speak in halls. Night took the city by slow degrees. Ned ate in the Tower of the Hand while Varley stood near the door and made a convincing impression of a piece of furniture. Arya came and slid into a chair without asking. Sansa came later and sat across from them with her hands folded. They ate bread with the hard crust and fish that had been stewed with onions and a little wine and cinnamon. The taste of the spice always surprised him, like a memory from a life he had not lived. "I do not like it here," Arya said around a mouthful. "No one does," Ned said. "Even those who say they do are liars or fools." "I want to go home," Sansa said very softly, and it was like a knife sliding through wool, quiet and sudden. "I have friends here, but they are not like mine at home, and I do not understand the things people say unless Septa Mordane is there to explain them. Even then, I do not really understand them. They do not say yes or no. They say perhaps and then they do something else. I do not like perhaps." "I will take you home," Ned said. It felt like a vow that he could make in a world where most vows now sat like stones in his stomach. "I will take you home when I can." "When?" Arya demanded. "When the law has been made to sit in its seat," he said. He did not tell them that laws were like children. They needed constant tending or they drifted in directions one would never have guessed. When he lay down later, the leg throbbed as if it had remembered the day more clearly and his head. Sleep came, went, came again, leaving behind a run of images that meant something but not enough to touch with a hand. He woke once to the sound of the city's breath changing and went to the window and watched torches move like fireflies in a jar. He would have watched until dawn, but he had to close his eyes on his own thoughts or be devoured by them. The first light, ravens arrived. One wore Stannis's colors at its leg, black and sullen as a sermon. The letter said very little in many words. It acknowledged receipt. It acknowledged Robert's death. It did not acknowledge Ned's right to breathe. Stannis would come, it said, with ships and men and proofs. Ned smiled despite himself. Stannis's proofs would be polished until a mirror would be ashamed beside them. There would be a book opened in the hall, and lineage would be recited in a voice like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Another messenger, more surprising, came from the west. A small square of thick paper without pretension. It was written in a clean, beautiful hand that surprised him. Tywin Lannister thanked the Lord Protector for his care of his daughter and grandchildren and requested to know the conditions of their comfort, their number of guards, the nature of their meals. He said he would send envoys. He did not threaten. He did not need to. You could feel the threat in the way the ink sat on the page, dark and patient. "Polite as a butcher's towel," Ned said to Varys, who smiled as if someone had tickled his foot. "Lord Tywin has had practice keeping his knives out of sight," Varys murmured. "He would prefer to cut without being seen. He is at Casterly Rock. He has recalled his banners." The river lords whisper to one another and go to their windows at night to listen for the sound of marching, and are surprised when they hear only their own breathing. "It will not be long. Then we will not be unready," Ned replied. "Ser Barristan." "Your Grace," Barristan said without a blink. He was not a man made to flatter. When he used a title, it was because it had become real to him. Ned hesitated a fraction and then let it pass. There would be time to be named. Time had refused him many things. It might give him this one when it chose. "Ser Barristan, you will ride to the Sept and speak with the High Septon. He will make an announcement. There will be a great council in King's Landing. He will summon lords with bells if he must. He will tell the commons that the Temple of the Gods will be open for petition and prayer, and that there will be bread outside its doors at noon for any who come to ask the gods for peace. And he will speak to them of law. Some men do not hear sermons unless they begin in thunder," Barristan observed. "Then let him borrow some thunder," Ned said. "The gods have plenty to spare." By afternoon, the dragon pit was alive with runners and carpenters and men pulling away the old lumber that had been used to store grain, their arms tan and their breaths making the work song that cities make whether they wish to or not. The pit had not been packed with dragon bones for a long time, but it had a bigness in it that made a man feel like a flea. Varys stood in the center and spread his arms and turned slowly, as if he could measure precisely how many lies could fit inside its circle. "Here," he said, "a realm will pretend to speak with a single voice. It will be charming. It may even be useful." "Is there any part of the world you do not find charming, Varys?" Ned asked dryly. "The parts where men speak the truth," Varys said with a smile. "But we need not fear encountering those often." At sundown, Ned sat again and wrote again. He wrote to Winterfell and told Robb what he had done and why, and told him to call no banners unless a Lannister host crossed the Trident. He wrote to Maester Luwin to see to the stores, to send grain south if he could. He wrote to Jon on the Wall, and though he did not say his name in the way his heart said it, he said his name as the world allowed it. And he told him to keep his eyes north and not south, because the things that move in the forests and on the ice do not care who sits who where. He wrote to Catelyn, though he did not know where in the Rivervale she might be, and he folded the words around the memory of her hair when it fell forward over her shoulder and smelled of clean rain. News grew legs and walked. It did not need help. Men told one another different versions of what had happened because it made them feel like they had been there when kings were made and broken. Some men said Ned Stark had howled and bared his teeth and taken the boy with blood on the floor and the boy had cried. Others said Cersei had fallen to her knees and begged in a voice that would make a priest pity her. Others said the hound had laughed and cut a man's throat, then used his dead hand to clap at the show. The truth lay somewhere in the middle and nowhere near any of them. Truth is shy. It does not often sit in taverns beside men with beer on their breath. On the third day, a black sail showed like an omen on the horizon, and by evening red sails to match it. Stannis Baratheon came ashore in a cloak the sober color of a bruise, jaw clenched as if it might splinter. He refused to stay at the Red Keep. He took rooms at the old Valerion Manse on the Street of Sisters, and something in that choice made Ned both respect him and want to curse him. Stannis did not want to be beholden to a man he thought beneath the law or above it. It was the same thing to him. He stood where he wanted to, where he thought he would not be compromised walking to either gallows or throne. They met in a chamber whose windows looked out on the bay. The water was a dull gray, cut by the streets of the wake of returning boats. Stannis came without flourish and without friendliness. He bowed the inch that said, "I will not be insulted," and not a hair's breadth more. "Lord Stark," he said in a voice that had no softness to it anywhere, "I have your letter." "Lord Stannis," Ned said. He would not say "Your Grace" until a crown had been placed by hands that were not his. He would not say it because he wanted things so badly that he might lie to get them. "I am glad you came. Where else should I be?" Stannis replied. His eyes were the color of deep water. "You have taken the queen and her get. I have put them where they cannot do harm. They are fed." Stannis's mouth tightened. One is owed no credit for feeding the children one imprisons. One is owed no credit for proving something everyone can see if they open their eyes. Ned returned, and saw a small flicker that might even have been humor pass over Stannis's face and be gone. "We will hold a great council. Your claim will be heard. The matter will be settled by law." "My claim is the law," Stannis said, and for once his certainty did not anger Ned, because he had needed some part of the world to be as simple as that. "The boy is not Robert's. I am next. The crown is mine. The duty then becomes yours. You will bend your knee. I will accept your oath. We will move on." Ned could feel the weight of the room, the way it pressed at his chest. "If you think I want anything else, you are blind. I will bend my knee to the law, but I will not put myself in your hands and call that law while the lords of the realm have not been allowed to speak. If you are king by right, you will be king by right with the realm's blessing. If you force it at sword point, you will be a king forever looking over your shoulder and counting knives." Stannis made a sound that was not laughter. "I will spend the rest of my life counting something," he said. "Respect, grain, ships. I may as well count knives. Men do not bless. They take. They are like gulls. You will throw them fish and they will shit on your windows." "Let us test it anyway," Ned said. "If you are determined to despise what we make you may, at least let us make it first." There was a long stillness then, the kind in which a man's thoughts go audible to himself and he likes neither their sound nor the fact of hearing them. Stannis looked at the water for a long time. His jaw worked and finally he nodded once. "Very well," he said, as if the words cost him skin. "We will play at law. But know this. If the council crowns me, I will not be merciful to the treason that has festered here. I will cut it out. I will not make pleasant faces to men who have made the realm a place where a queen may lay with her brother and call it love. Mercy is not always pleasant," Ned said, "but sometimes it keeps the rot from returning. Think of that when you begin your cutting." Stannis's mouth twitched in something like distaste, as at a dish he knew he must swallow for his health. He left with the same lack of flourish he had come with. Outside, a thin rain had begun. It smelled like relief to Ned. It smelled like washing a wound. Word came next from the Reach. Mace Tyrell sent what amounted to a poem about his own importance and 3 ships full of barley and rye that made the commons clap their hands in the markets. He also sent a quiet letter via his mother, Olenna Redwine, in which it was written in a hand sharp as a thorn that if the realm wished to remain in one piece, it might consider marrying the right pieces to one another. Ned smiled at that and did not show it to anyone. He did not want to think yet of making his daughters into bridges, though he knew the world had a way of making men use what span they had. From the west came hard men with careful mouths and little color in their clothes. Kevan Lannister, dutiful as a ledger, came to discuss terms that were not called terms. His eyes were steady, and he did not reach for his sword because he had trained his arm so thoroughly to reach for reason first. Tywin's second son made no threats. He made only statements. He took tea politely. He studied Ned as if he were a new measure for grain that might cheat him or grace him with more than he had paid for. "The Lady Cersei is comfortable," Kevan said, which was a way of saying she was not and should be, but that he would not accuse his host of lacking in courtesy. "Her children are fed. They are guarded. I am told that the boy Joffrey is spirited. He is 12, Ned said, and has been taught that frowns will open doors. Doors sometimes open to pits. You have children," Kevan observed. It was not a question, but it had one buried inside it. "I do," Ned said. I would have liked better that this be settled at Casterly Rock. Kevin went on in the same mild voice. But a great council in the capital is acceptable. Lord Tywin will come with enough men to make our concerns understood. He paused. He prefers it not come to swords. I prefer it as well, Ned said. What does Lord Tywin want? Security, Kevin said simply. The rock secure, his daughter secure, his grandchildren. He stopped. He was a man of the West. He did not like to say things that were not pleasant. He pursed his lips. The children secure. The law secure, Ned answered. Kevin's eyes glinted. We will see if those are the same thing, he said. By the time the moon had made 2 slow circuits of the sky, the dragon pit was ready. Bedrolls strewed its corridors. Flags sprouted like weeds. Trout and roses, krakens and sun spears and flayed men. Men argued in halls and made bargains in latrines and swore oaths before gods and broke them before they came back outside. Ned walked among them like a ghost that would not be exorcised. He listened. He sent food in barrels rolling like the small drumbeats of a war that had not started. He spoke rarely and he did not threaten because he knew threats from him would be only words. He held Cersei in her tower and the children in safe rooms, and he listened for the sound of a single sword leaving its sheath at the wrong time. It did not come. People are herd creatures. They will do what the herd does until a wolf comes. The High Septon spoke before a sea of faces. He had a good voice unexpectedly. He used it as one uses a bell to call men in from fields. He spoke of Robert's death with genuine sorrow and of the sadness of kingship and of the God's will and of law. He spoke the word law often enough that it became a refrain, and men found themselves muttering along because it was something to say that was not a threat. When he named Stannis Baratheon's claim, men murmured. When he spoke of the accusations against Cersei, carefully, as if the words might light a fire, they gasped. When he spoke of the boy Joffrey's nature, they were silent. Men do not like to be told that their entertainment is a child's vanity with a crown on it. The Lord spoke. They spoke to their own glory and to their houses and to the sense in their bellies. Some spoke for Stannis because he was the law as they had learned to recite it. Some spoke for themselves because Renly had found them in corners and whispered to them with a smile and a promise. Some spoke for the West because Tywin had sent gold that had turned in their palms and felt like future. Some spoke for the Reach because grain filled wagons and fed men and made them easy to persuade. Some spoke for the North and for the Vale because those were places where memory lived longer. On the 5th day of the council, rain came and did not go. It drummed on the pit's old stones, ran in rivulets where dragons had once been dragged out to sun themselves. It made the banners hang limp. Men became short-tempered. Arguments had an edge to them that made Ned listen harder. His hand straying to his hip and the sword that was not ice but did the work at hand. He thought of Winterfell's Godswood and the way rain fell there, too, though quieter, and wondered that water could be so many different kinds of thing when it fell from one sky. On the 6th morning, Stannis spoke at last. He had had enough of listening to men who could not say a thing without fattening it. He stepped into the circle and opened a calf-bound book and read. Names, dates, marriages. He said the boy's hair was a wrong color, and he said it 3 different ways when men seemed not to want to hear it the first time. He said city guards had whispered in alleys that did not lie. He spoke of the bed a queen shared with her brother. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Men remembered what they had seen and not admitted. They shifted where they stood and looked at the floor. Men do not like to see themselves when the mirror is held to them by a man who will not let his hand shake the smallest bit. When he finished, there was a hush in which every person present could hear his own breathing. If the world had been made of softer stuff, Stannis Baratheon would have been crowned then and there, and the story would have ended with a neatness that would have satisfied a monk. The world is not made of such stuff. The world is made of appetites. Renly came, and he was beautiful, and he poured charm into the circle like wine. He spoke of the realm not wanting a flinty Puritan in black cloaks counting their sins and cutting their pleasures. He spoke of summer and laughter as if these would be enough to keep winter out. Men smiled because they felt tired and would have liked to be given permission to rest. Some looked at him with their mouths open and their tongues out, waiting for the sweet. Tywin Lannister did not speak much. He had come, pale and resplendent, the lion crouched on his breast. He gave the hall the small courtesy of remaining until the proof had been dropped like a hammer. Then he sent Kevan to speak for him, and Kevan said, "Law, yes," in a reasonable voice, and then said, "Mercy, also yes," and then said that perhaps the boy could be made lord of something a few years hence. He did not say what. He did not say the West kept its gold. He did not need to. Ned listened and did not speak because he had learned in this city that there is a kind of dignity in silence that cannot be bought or spoken around. He felt something begin to move in the hall that was not any one man's doing. It was the slow turning of a herd that had been heading one way and had begun, almost without knowing it, to head another. He walked back to his chamber under the rain with his hair wet and his limp pronounced and sat and put his hands on his knees and stared at them. Varys came quietly and stood there and said nothing a long while. At last he could not help himself. "It is a wonder," he admitted, as if to himself as much as to Ned. "A wonder. The way you do not open your mouth and somehow everything moves toward your will anyway." "It is not my will," Ned said. "It is the law remembering what it is. It is men remembering themselves." Varys smiled faintly. "That is a poet's answer. Will you be a king that writes verses?" "I will be a man who sleeps at night," Ned said. "Or tries." On the 7th day, when the rain had gone to mist and the air smelled like a wet stone kissed by sun, the High Septon anointed a king in the September of Baelor. That was the way it had been done before. It should have been Stannis. Ned had thought so, and he had told anyone to whom he had a right to speak the truth that that was what law demanded. But the hall had turned elsewhere. It had turned toward the man who had held the realm together for a week with nothing but bread and a letter and the sweat of his stubbornness. It had turned toward the man whose house words told them the thing all their mothers had told them when they were boys. Winter is coming. It had turned because some men thought, let the north hold the center until the storm passes, and some thought, I will get what I want from a man who is not greedy, and some thought, better a just cold than a warm lie. He would have refused if refusing would have done anything but break the thing that had been made in those days. He closed his eyes and saw the long hall in Winterfell and the bones of his father and the old gods looking with their blind carved eyes through the snow. He opened them and looked at Catelyn in his mind and knew what she would say, do what keeps them all alive. He listened to the oil's whisper as it ran over his brow. He felt the cool touch of the Septon's ringed fingers. He looked at the circle of faces and found no joy in them but a kind of relief that moved him more than acclaim could. He knelt because he had been asked to kneel by something that did not live in any one man's voice. He rose because he was asked to rise by a country afraid of itself. He took the sword they gave him. It was not ice. It would never be ice. He would bring ice south one day and it would make a different sound when we struck with it, a sound that would tell him that something had come right in the world. For now he took what was at hand. He spoke the words the Septon put in his mouth and tried to make them his own. When he was done, he was King Eddard, first of his name, and the new-crowned roar in his ears was like surf that had come far inland and did not know yet that it could drown a man if he did not plant his feet. Cersei did not attend. Stannis did. He stood with his mouth a line and his eyes narrowed and his jaw clenched. After, when the scent of the oil was still in his hair and a crown had made his head feel oddly heavier in a way that was not quite physical, Ned went to him. This was not the law, Stannis said without preamble. The law is not a thing men cobble in a pit. It was the only way it stands, Ned said. You have a choice now, Lord Stannis. Help me set the law so hard it will not be cobbled again. Or tear it down trying to wear it as a coat. Stannis stared at him. The muscles in his cheeks settled. I will be your hand, he said suddenly, and the words sounded like a man spitting something out of his mouth that he had found there against his will. And I will be the hand that strikes when the law needs a fist, but I will not kiss your ring. Do you understand me? Your mouth has never been made for kissing anyone's ring, Ned said. I would not ask it. So Stannis bent his long back half an inch and called him king and was named Hand before the day was 2 hours older. and men shook their heads and pretended they had foreseen it. Tywin Lannister sent more envoys, and this time they came with their cloaks thrown back and their hands visible. He did not cross the Trident with an army. He would someday, but not this day. Kevan negotiated a treaty that read like a book of sermons and had a single line in it that mattered. Cersei and her children would be given safe conduct to Casterly Rock when the council had completed its work and when the new order had placed enough weight behind itself that their departure would not unmake it. In exchange, the West would keep its banners furled. Gregor Clegane was named for trial. No one looked at Tywin's face when that bit of ink dried. Tyrion Lannister arrived into this with a grin like a knife and a manner that made men both glad and alarmed to find themselves in the same room. He found Cersei, and the shouting from that tower made the ravens blink. He found Ned, and they spoke briefly and surprisingly amicably of bread and coin and how much of a city's peace could be purchased with a pig properly prepared. The Reach kept sending grain. The Stormlands did not break. The Riverlands did not burn. The Ironborn stirred and grumbled and sent out their long noses from their broken-looking islands. But Ned sent them a letter that said, among other things, that the first Reaver who set foot on the mainland would be hanged and his bird sent back stuffed with the notice. He wore the crown rarely. He did not like the feel of it. It made his head ache. When he sat the throne, he felt its cold teeth through his clothes and decided that if he had to be bitten, he at least would be bitten awake. He spent his mornings in the yard with the men who trained the city's watch, and in the kitchens with the women who baked bread, and in the counting house with men who sweated over columns of numbers that did not always submit to their wishes. He spent his afternoons hearing petitioners in a hall that smelled of dust and frankincense and men who were nervous. He spent his evenings with parchment. He slept less than he had since the rebellion. He woke sometimes with tears in his eyes and did not know if he had been crying in a dream or if something in the world had found its way to him in his sleep and moved him while he could not protect himself with caution and silence. He met with the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch in a plain room instead of the usual airy place. There was no need for ceremony when speaking about the end of the world. Jeor Mormont was iron in the shape of a man, and he brought with him the scent of cold and wood smoke that made Ned's nose ache with memory. They spoke of wildlings and of things stranger than wildlings. They spoke of a dead man whose eyes had opened blue when they should have stayed shut. They spoke of numbers and of need. Ned sent men and grain north and did not care that petty lords in the Crownlands whispered that he loved the Wall more than their little troubles. He wrote a letter to Old Town about Dragonglass, and the maesters there answered with polite interest, as they always did, and sent a crate of obsidian knives that would break the first time they struck something that was not what they had been made for. He did it anyway. Sometimes the world rewards foolishness as if it were faith. Sansa learned how to move through the court without touching anything that might stain her hands or her soul. She learned when to speak and when to make her lips into a flower that opened but did not promise nectar. She came to him one night with a paper in her hand and an eagerness in her face. "Lady Olenna spoke to me," she said in a rush. "She says that ongs are poison if you drink them too fast. She says I must learn to smell the cup and only sip when I mean to. I think she would make me drink another kind of poison, but she thinks I do not know." "Ido." "She is teaching you the court's wars," Ned said softly. He thought of Catelyn and her quick mind and her steady hands, the way she had kept their house when he had been away and when he had been there too. "I do not want to be a weapon," Sansa whispered. "No," Ned said, and stripped the word of all the softness it might have had. "But you will be a weapon that knows where the hilt is and who holds it." Arya disappeared sometimes, and he had Varley and Desmond shadow her, and they lost her with embarrassing regularity. He found her one morning on the walls watching ships. She had a smear of soot on her cheek and a grin that had more of the north in it than anything he had seen south of the neck for months. "Gendry showed me how to hammer a rivet," she said. "He said I hit like a little lordling. I hit him, and now he says I hit like a little wolf. Do not hit boys except when they deserve it," Ned said. "Which looks to be always." She laughed. It was the same laugh as when she had been very small and had hidden beneath the table and barked like a pup at his boots. He felt something unclench in him and thought, this is why men do this. Not for crowns. For the sound their children make when they are pleased with themselves. Catelyn came at last, tired and fierce at once, brought by men of the Riverlands whose eyes had not unlearned the habit of fear. She moved like a woman who had carried burdens until her bones had been taught exactly where they were. She stood in the doorway to his solar, and he stood, and she came to him, and he put his hands around her face, and they kissed as if the world were coming to an end, and the kiss were a way of telling it to wait a little longer. He told her what he had done, and she did not scold him or praise him. She took his hand and led him to the window and said, "Look, there is a net spread. See where it glitters. See where it does not. That is where a fish will jump through." They spread the net together. They closed the holes where they could. In that season, in that fragile first year of a reign the realm had not expected, a fragile peace held. It held because men were tired, and because women were stubborn, and because the harvest did not fail, and because the worst men had decided to wait to do the worst things until the ground had become firmer beneath them. It held because the North had lent the South a gravity it had not had since dragons died. And for a while men felt that perhaps there was something here that would not blow away at the first ill wind. It would not last forever. Ned knew that even as he walked through rooms in which children played without looking up at the year and its cares, the world always sends something at the moment you have put down your guard to feed a child or kiss a wife. A raven would come with the wrong seal. A messenger's horse would blow lather at the gates. A sail would show on the horizon, and when it turned the right way it would show the wrong colors. Men would open their mouths and count other things again, because nothing counts itself if left unattended. Coin, swords, grudges, winters. For now, he lay beside Caitlin in a bed that had belonged to men he would not emulate, with the sea whispering a long, patient song, and he did something he had not done since he had come south. He slept without a stone in his chest. When he woke there would be a list waiting, petitions, council papers, wounds to bind and debts to be paid. There would be a boy in a tower who hated him and a woman in a room who had 1,000 ways to do harm. There would be a kingdom balanced like a plate on a stick. He would walk beneath it and hold up his hand. He knew that his arm would grow tired. He knew winter would come. He slept anyway because sleep too is a way of fighting. In the darkest hour before dawn, a wind came off the bay that smelled strange, sweet, and iron at once. It threaded the alleys, lifted the edge of flags, pushed quietly at closed doors. Down in a warehouse where the floor smelled of salt and rope and ancient fish, a crate shifted of its own accord, and a small thing in it moved and made a sound like a kitten and like a knife. Far to the east, in a city made of ladders and smoke, a woman with pale hair held onto a promise she had made to herself and to something older than herself, and she did not know yet that the promise would be kept in a hall where a northern man had just taught an old city how to breathe. By morning the wind would have changed. The list would be waiting. A boy would stamp his foot in a room and demand a crown. A man would come up the river with news like a stone. Stannis would sit with his jaw clenched, and Skagos' sheep would try to chew on the king's robe as if it were a thing their teeth could test. Ned would rise and take up the weight, and he would feel in his blood, as he always had, everything that had been laid in him in a hall far from here. He would feel the words "winter is coming" as if someone were speaking them to him in a language he had known between one breath and the next. He would go out into the day. He would be the thing he had sworn. He would try, with the tools the world had given him, bread, law, patience, steel, to build a house that would not fall. And somewhere, in a part of him that had been a boy and had watched snow fall through the Godswood's branches in a hush that felt like the world beginning, he would believe it could be done. The morning found the city throwing off its mist like a man lifting his hair from his eyes after a bath. Ned broke his fast with bread that burned his fingers through the crust and a slab of cheese wrapped in leaves from the gardens below the towers. A wind off Blackwater Bay slid through the open casements and lifted the pap. Airs on his table as if to remind him that words were light until men held them down with their hands. Stannis arrived early with his jaw already clenched and an ink stain at the edge of his thumb, as if he had been arguing with a letter. They spoke of ships and stores and the hard, dull work that made a day safer than the one before. It was as near to friendship as either man could manage before sunrise. By mid-morning, a petition of 10 fishmongers and 3 butchers had filed into the hall to praise the price of grain and to complain about the price of salt. Ned listened and thought of his father, who had said once that the easiest way to be loved was to cut prices and the easiest way to be hated was to raise them. He sent them away with a small purse made from the royal coffers and a larger admonition made from common sense. A boy with quick eyes hovered near the back of the hall, his hair an unruly shock, his feet too big for him yet. Arya watched him from the gallery and made a face that said she had taken his measure and found him wanting. Sansa stood beside Septa Mordane with her hands laced and her chin lifted an inch in that new way of hers that said she was learning to see from above without losing her footing. The sweet weather made the day feel almost gentle. It was the sort of day upon which a man might lay down an ounce of vigilance, after many such days piled together. It was the sort of day upon which men died from carelessness. The bolt came out of a shadow where a shadow should not have been, quick and mean, the kind of thing a coward loves. It was aimed very well. It would have taken Eddard Stark beneath the breastbone and made of him a lesson in the value of caution. Arya shouted a wordless warning as she flung herself sideways along the gallery rail. Ned had turned his head to answer a question he had not liked. The movement drew the arrow off its true. It cut his robe and put a kiss of blood like a red thumbprint along his ribs. Barristan moved faster than any old man had a right to move and had his white cloak around Ned as if that thin cloth could be armor. The second bolt thunked into oak and hummed there as if angry at having missed blood. The hall erupted the way a pond does when a stone is thrown. Ripples of alarm spread until they crashed against the walls. "Down," Stannis said in a voice that was more order than sound. He stepped half in front of Ned without seeming to think it odd, his body making a wall where a wall was needed. In the gallery, Arya had one leg hooked around the rail and hung out over the hall like a child whose dare had gone too far. She pointed with her free hand. "There," she cried. "The red curtain." Men moved. Desmond hit the curtain with his shoulder and a tangle of body and cloth collapsed onto the floor behind it. The man wriggling out of the crimson spill had the narrow chest of a city rat and the eyes of a man who had learned very young to expect fists. He had a blackwood bow with a hinge in the middle that would fold neatly into a box. He had a dagger of a city kind, all polish and pretty work. In his mouth he had a curse. Barristan's boot came down on the wrist that held the knife and the curse turned into a whine. The man's teeth were bad as a map of old roads. Janos Slynt did not come running. That was a small mercy, because Ned did not wish to see who he would look at first. It was the new captain of the watch, Hara the Willow, a woman from the river with shoulders like a door beam and a habit of listening before she spoke, who knelt and took the assassin's chin in 2 fingers. She did not look at his face, but at his hands at the inside of his left forearm, where a tiny tattoo of a lantern had been inked in blue. "Dark cells," she said, and there was not so much surprise in her as satisfaction. Baelish's men used them for errands no one should see. Littlefinger arrived a moment later, the last man in the room to appear frightened and the first to appraise what fear he should perform. He took in the curtain, the arrow in the wood, the king's robe cut, the new captain on one knee. He made his mouth into an O and then into a bright line. "Gods," he said lightly. "The city cannot get through a day without wanting to eat itself." Ned looked at him. It was a long look. It seemed to reach across rooms, across months of jests like beads on a string. It seemed to remember a knife at his throat in a brothel and a promise that had not been kept. Something in Peter's gaze flickered once like a mote caught in sun. He spread his hands. They were pretty hands, clean and useless. "Take him," Ned said. "Take him to the cells. Hara will hold him. Ser Barristan, bring Lord Peter to the council chamber." Littlefinger's smile did not tilt this time. It vanished, neat as a coin in a practiced palm. He bowed a little and could not quite make it seem like a flourish. "Of course, my lord," he murmured. "The council and I have always gotten on." The council chamber was cool and clean because Stannis had had all the rugs beaten until the dust had fled to other rooms. The shutters were open. The bay made a sound like distant applause against the harbor chains. Peter took his chair and crossed his legs and placed his ankle on his knee with the care of a man arranging a trap and waiting to see who steps into it. Varys floated in. Pycelle coughed once and then again. Stannis stood with his hands clasped behind him like a jailer, who has not yet decided whether to give a man water. An assassin, Ned said. The cut along his ribs had dried into a tacky line that itched. He did not scratch it. Hired in the dark cells, carrying a bow that folds into a box and a dagger with pretty work on the hilt. Hara says the lantern tattoo on his arm marks him as one of the men who used to do the errands that belonged to Lord Baelish. Littlefinger put a hand to his chest. "You wound me, my lord," he said, "even if you had not already threatened me with A2. Via. Dark Cells does not belong to me. It belongs to a very clever woman who sells secrets in cups of claret." "Whom you paid," Stannis said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Whom you pay still, if you think her hands reach far enough to pick up coin you leave on tables." "I pay many people," Peter said brightly. "That is how things are done in civilized places. I imagine even you throw a coin to a child now and then, Lord Stannis." Stannis took a step toward him. "I do not pay for men to point death at a king." "Nor do I," Peter returned, and his eyes sharpened. "I pay for information. I am not a sellsword. I am a very small man with a very honest profession. I say what I learn. I am paid for saying it." "And what you learned," Ned said, "is that if I died in a hall before noon on a fair day, the city might be a different place by sunset." Littlefinger's lips thinned. He had never liked to be told he was simple. "What I learned," he said carefully, "is that you have made enemies enough to populate a small village. Any one of them would pay to see you cut down between the bread and the salt. If you think I arranged it, prove it. Bring your proof to the steps of the Sept and read it to the people. Or do as you did before. Make the sum in your head and call it law." "Hara will bring men from Dark Cells," Ned said, "and from the kitchens of the manse by the hook where you keep your quiet feasts. She will bring them in one by one, and we will see what they say when they are told the difference between a rope and a pardon." "Varys," the eunuch fluttered his fingers and sighed. "It will be a sad day," he murmured, "when the river carries so many fish that the fishermen begin to throw them back because their baskets are full." Peter's gaze flicked to Varys and then back. He had weighed them all 1,000 times. He weighed them again. His cheek twitched. He smiled then, but it was a bare thing like teeth without lips. "Do as you must," he said. "If you cannot see that I am the man who keeps your floor from collapsing beneath you, then build yourself a new floor. I will stand somewhere else and watch to see whether you fall." "That is the first honest thing you have said," Stannis told him. Hara the Willow came with 2 of her watch. She did not touch Peter as she led him away. He did not look back, though he wanted to. In the afternoon, men came up the hall with their heads down, and others came with their hands open. One spoke of copper passed hand to hand. One spoke of a silver seal pressed to a folded paper. One spoke of an order written in a small neat hand and bearing only a sigil, a mockingbird. Later, when the day had gone to that pale yellow that made the bay look shallow as a mirror, and there were gulls balancing on the wind outside the window casements, Peter said the words that Lisa Arryn had never lived long enough to say in a court. "I put an idea in a woman's ear," he confessed, and it sounded for once like his throat hurt when he swallowed. "There are 1,000 ways to kill a man without touching him. The softest way is words whispered at night by someone he trusts. Jon Arryn wanted to live forever with the taste of righteousness in his mouth. I gave him a sweet lozenge and he choked on it." He smiled at the look on Pycelle's face, a little flash of the old enjoyment that had grown like a fungus in him south of the neck. He looked at Ned and the smile fell away. "I did not put a bow in that man's hand today," he said, and for once it did not sound like a lie. "I would have used something with a longer string." "Open court at dawn," Ned said. He had thought of this while Peter spoke, and while he thought of it he could feel the weight of ice in his hand, though he did not carry it in the south. "No secrets, no dark corners. Every man who cares can hear you say those words. The city will know why Jon Arryn died. The city will know that I did not hinge my throne on whispers. Stannis will put his hand to it and the High Septon will watch. The gods can see. So can men. You will cut my head," Peter said, and there was no softness in him now. He sounded tired, suddenly tired in a way that made age sit on him like a coat too heavy for his shoulders. And you will go to sleep with the taste of iron in your mouth and dream of a girl with red hair and a boy with a wooden sword. And you will tell yourself that this was the same as those other days. It is not the same. Those days were winter. This day is spring. Men make mistakes in spring. They think the weather will hold. The weather does not hold, Ned said. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Peter's mouth twisted back to mockery with an effort that made it uglier. A phrase for men with muscles and simple heads. It is a phrase for men who do not hide behind boys with knives, Stannis said. The court sat full next morning. The great doors were left open and the air made the braziers useless, and smoke wandered away into a pale blue that tasted faintly of sea. Peter was brought in without a rope around his neck and without a hood. He walked with that insolent grace of his that always looked borrowed from someone more sure of himself. He admitted what he had done in front of a city that loved tales. He tried to turn it into one. He tried to shape himself as the clever man who had moved pieces across a board because the world was a game. Varys stood and said calmly that it was not a game to a woman with her husband's body cooling in a tower in the morning. Pycelle wept in his chest for the old hand and spoke of letters delivered and carried in damp with Queen Cersei's wax. Hara the Willow spoke with the tight precision of a woman who had been poor and intended never to be again. Stannis spoke for the law with words that sounded like a man hammering iron into shape. When it was done, Ned stood. He did not call for the headsman. He had had ice brought from Winterfell, at last by a man he trusted to carry it without coveting it. He would not swing it in the south if there were any way to avoid it, because it would be like bringing winter into a place not made for it. But this day asked for it. The city needed to see that the man who ruled it was not afraid to lay the ghosts he had called up. He put his hands on the dark leather and felt the old ripple travel up his arms into his shoulders. Peter looked at the blade and, for the first time, seemed to be considering the world as it would be when he no longer stood in it. "Do you want to pray?" Ned asked. His voice was steady. He did not look at the crowd. "I have been praying all my life," Peter said. "To myself." His eyes searched the faces nearest him and found none that wanted to be found. He swallowed. "Tell Cat no. Do not tell Cat anything." He made his mouth into a smile. Failed. "You always did look better with winter on your shoulders." Ned did not answer. He passed the sentence. He swung the sword. When ice came down, it was not elegant. It was clean. The sound the blade made against the block set something in the hall humming like a cup touched by a finger. A murmur went through the crowd, the strange sound people make when they discover that a story has cost someone something. Ned did not enjoy it. He did not enjoy it as he wiped the blade and did not enjoy it as he carried it away. He did not eat well that day or sleep well that night. Justice was meat that nourished and sat heavy in the stomach. The city breathed differently after. The very air felt as if a tight band had been cut. Men who had sharpened their smiles on Peter's wit looked elsewhere to discover where their faces would find favor. Mummers played a rude little show in the square by the hook in which a short man with a bird on his shoulder tried to steal a crown and tripped over his own feet. It was funny in the way poor men make things funny when their fear has been given a door with a latch they can throw with their own hands. Tywin Lannister sent no letter about it. The silence from the west was one of those silences that make men worry more than words would. Kevin came and raised his brows and shook his head with the air of a man disappointed in the quality of a cloth he had been assured would be finer. Tyrion laughed aloud in a way that was not entirely pleasant, and then spent 3 days closeted with Hara the Willow and with the men who counted the city's coin. He emerged with a list of ideas that made Stannis grunt then nod, which was the warmest approval a man could hope for from that quarter. The North watched. Ravens went and came. Robb wrote with a hand that had gotten steadier since Ned had last seen him, and with a mind that had gotten sharper in ways that made Ned ache with pride, and with the knowledge that he had missed things he should have been there to teach. Bran sent a letter in which he had scrawled a drawing of a wolf with wings. Rickon dictated a message that was mostly a list of foods he liked and a question about whether the king had more cheese than any man. Catelyn wrote without wasting a word and made those words perform the work of 10 men. She had suggestions, and they were good ones, and when he followed them the city ran smoother, and when he did not he found himself swearing at a problem that should have been solved the day before. Then came the raven that did not want to come into the light. It sat on the windowsill and looked sideways at the room with an eye like a bead of ice, and it would not let a groom touch it. It would only hop onto Ned's wrist when Ned held it out, and when he did so he felt the lightest chill through his sleeve, as if the bird carried a cold in its bones and it had seeping edges. The message bound to its leg was sealed with black wax, and the imprint was the bear of the night's watch set clumsily. Within, the words were Mormont's, plain and ugly and without flattery. "We are losing men," the letter said. "They do not stay dead. The woods are wrong. The cold comes earlier. I do not like the look of the moon. Send men if you will. Send grain and oil. Send obsidian. Send a king's word that the realm remembers it has a wall." Ned read it in the council chamber and looked at Stannis over the edge of the page. Stannis's mouth thinned. "There is always a letter from the wall," he said. "They have made a trade of being worried. But this one is different," Varys finished softly. "If I had a hair to rise, it would rise. It smells like the door opening to a room men have not entered in a long time." "Obsidian," Stannis said. "We have dragonglass on Dragonstone enough to arm every mummer in King's Landing with pretty knives. It will not hold an edge for meat. But if the Lord Commander asks for it to kill something else, we will give it." "Davos can be trusted," Ned said. "Give him the ships. We will open the stores again. The city will grumble and then look up. It is a better complaint than the one they will have when the dead walk through their alleyways asking for salt." "Is that what they do?" Tyrion asked idly. "Ask for salt?" Ned did not know. He did not think anyone in the room did. He thought perhaps there were old women in the north who knew and who would not say it because saying it could call it. He thought of old Nan and of the way her voice had gone creaky when she told Bran the story of the things that live when men do not. He put the letter down. "Summon the lords," he said. "Not to the pit, not to a show, to the road north. Men do not like to lift their eyes farther than their bellies will warn them." The first letters came back with polite words and not enough urgency. Then Jeor Mormont sent another raven, and within was a strip of cloth that had been a man's sleeve, and on it a smear that seemed to be dried salt and not salt, and around it the letter that told of a ranger found frozen to the ground with his own tears as pearls along his cheek. KS, and of eyes that opened blue when they should have closed brown. Stannis stood silent for a long time in the council chamber with that piece of cloth under his hand. When he left the room, he had already given orders to the errand keepers to push out summons that would make men feel the cold through their boots. Ned sent for Howland Reed then, not for the first time, but with a tag upon the raven's leg that was his own and that said, in words only two men living could read, that the promise in the Tower of Joy had come to claim its portion. He did not know if Reed was in his watery fastness or out in the reeds catching fish with his hands the way men no longer thought to do. He did not know if the gods would deliver to him this one small mercy, a truth spoken aloud in time for it to be used as a tool and not only as a stone to put on a grave. The road north began in the yard below the Red Keep's outer wall. Men who had come to the city to hawk wine now stood in rows to have their names taken down so that they could be told to carry barrels of oil, because torches are as important as swords when the dark wishes to breathe in your face. Ned put Hara the Willow over the city watch in Tyre and watched the lines straighten and the bribes trickle along the gutter into the sea because men would not risk that woman's flat blue gaze for a little extra coin. Tyrion wrangled wagons and cursed happily. Stannis sat with ink and quills and made a plan of numbers that would feed an army on the march, even if every Lord Steward remembered to bring only himself. Cersei sent a note from her tower that said the king would die on the road, and if he did not, she would console herself by counting the steps between the place where Ned's foot slipped and the place where his neck broke, that she might someday have a set of stairs crafted to that number and climb them in her mind when she needed to be cheered. Ned sent back a tray of glazed pears, because Queen Cersei had always liked them and because a small kindness was like a little stone in a sling. It did a thing at a distance, when one could not always see the result. Before they left, the September of Baelor stood open a night and a day for people to come and pray. The line went from the steps to the square and bent around the corner and into a lane and back again like a poor man's snake. The High Septon spoke of a wall that can stand only if men stand on both sides and hold it up. In the kitchens, women baked bread until their fingers swelled and split. In the armories, boys who had never seen snow wrapped dragonglass into wooden hafts and tied it with sinew like the strings on a lute. Gendry worked until his face shone with heat and pride, and Arya brought him water and insults and grim jokes overheard from Hara's men until his smile looked more like a weapon than a kindness. They marched when the moon was a thin white cut in the sky and the wind out of the north smelled not of snow yet but of the place snow comes from. The city spilled men into it and closed back up after them like water, and then it was only road and the state of boots and the way dust clung to eyebrows. Stannis rode near the front with a cloak so plain it made other men's fancy ones seem foolish. Tyrion rode a sturdy little mare that had no patience for his legs and bit the air whenever he tried to urge her to anything beyond a steady pace. Barristan was white as frost at dawn and as steady. Davos rose at the tail of the fleet offshore where the coast ran gray and stubborn, his masts like thorns against the sky. Ned rode with his head turned north 1 degree more than any other man's, as if he could bring the distance down by will. He did not bring Sansa. He did not bring Arya. He had told them so. Arya had smiled at him in a way that said she did not need to be brought to arrive where she wished to be. He assigned Varley to her shadow. Sansa did not smile at all when he told her she would steer the court in his absence with Catelyn and the High Septon and Olenna Tyrell, and with Stannis' ink-stained second son who feared gods and men equally. She only said, "Yes, father," and moved her fingers across the table the way a harpist might begin to find the notes of a song she had decided to play. They crossed the trident where Robert had once swung his hammer and made of a man a footnote. The bridge had been mended. The water moved slow and deceptive beneath. Men who had never learned how to judge a current fell in and came up coughing and laughing, and the men who had learned how to judge it looked away because laughter belongs to the young. At Moat Cailin they camped and let the men rest because the marsh steals strength quick as jealousy. Ned stood on broken stone and listened to the wind push whispering things through the reeds. He thought of the men who had choked in that swamp in old campaigns, and of men in other times who had built those massy stones and gone to dust without ever seeing the place they built. Howland Reed came at dusk as the light was going gray and made him out of the reeds like a man the marsh had grown to greet an old friend. He was older and smaller than Ned remembered, which is the way of men who live long in quiet places, but his eyes were the same, the quick frog-bright eyes of the neck. He bowed, and the bow was shallow and deep in the way only men who have never been taught courts can manage. It meant he knew who Ned was and was not afraid of it. "Ned," he said, as if pronouncing a fact. "Howland," Ned returned. They sat on a rock whose top was flat as a table. If it had not been, Howland would have made it so with his hands anyway. He was that kind of man. The men of the guard drifted away because even hard men from hard places know when the air around two men is not to be disturbed. Reed said nothing a long time. Ned did not force speech on him. The reeds whispered. The frogs clicked in their throats. The water did what water always does in the end. Eck. It lied calmly and waited for feet to trust it. "You kept your promise longer than I thought you could," Reed said at last. "Longer than I could have. I am glad for you, and sorry." "I am tired of being both glad and sorry," Ned said simply. Howland took from his pouch a small wrapped bundle. He set it between them and unwrapped it as if it were a cake made for girls. Careful, delighted, and grave all at once. Inside, wrapped in old cloth that smelled faintly of damp and cedar, was a strip of silk with a pattern so faded it was more suggestion than color. He set it in Ned's hands. Ned knew it as soon as his fingers touched it. He did not need to see it to know it. It was a ribbon that had belonged to a girl who had run faster than the wind. It had been tied around a vase of blue flowers in a room that had smelled of blood and blood and blood. "She wrote," Howland said. "Whether the gods carried it to you before now, I do not know. Perhaps they thought the timing better now. The gods are as fond of spectacle as mummers are." Ned did not smile. He held the ribbon and felt it leach his strength and give it back. He unrolled the strip of paper within with hands that did not tremble, because he had trained his hands. The words were Lyanna's, and they were as plain and true as she had been. She had told him what he already knew, and she had told him to do as he had done, and she had told him that she had never meant to put on a crown but only to stop being a thing men chose without asking her. "I will tell the boy," Ned said when he could say anything at all. His voice sounded to his own ears like the inside of a seashell. "You will tell the man," Howland corrected. "You will tell him at the wall. It will be easier there, where oaths and truths sit in the same room and do not feel jealous." They went north from the moat in a rain that tasted familiar. Wolves called at night in voices that made southern men pull blankets up as if wool could stop that sound from entering their bones. Ravens went ahead. Word went ahead, too, faster than birds, because rumor needs no rest or food. When they came to Winterfell, the flayed men of the Dreadfort had sent a contingent to stand with House Stark, and the men with them had a hungry look that was old and not comforting. Roose Bolton's eyes were pale and disinterested as dew. He laid them upon the crown and looked away, which told Ned what he needed to know. Roose would not betray until betrayal would taste better than obedience. Great John Umber laughed until he coughed and then laughed again. Manderley sent more wagons than he had been asked to, and in each wagon was a small cask of salt fish labeled as if it were for a lord's table and meant for the men who would not see a lord's table in their lives. Karstark's men leaned on their spears with the quiet of men who like to be told to hold and then be allowed to pull the spear back only when it has blood on it. Robb looked older by the gate than he had the year before, and when he put his hand out for his father's forearm, his hand was a man's. "Mother has kept this place from falling down around our ears," he said in the words he had chosen to be his first. "I have learned what walls are for." "You'll learn it again," Ned said, clasping his son. He felt the strength in him. He felt the Winterfell in him. "Before the year is out, you will learn it again." The men of the north joined the march like stones rolling downhill to join a landslide. Their noise was different from southern noise. It had less of the reaching for laughter and more of the steady rhythm of men who know that what they are about to do will not be done in a day. Catelyn stood with Sansa and with Bran sitting in a chair at the gate as the host went out. Arya was not to be seen. Ned did not seek her with his eyes. If he had, she would have thrilled to his care and used it as a shield against caution. He had learned very late something girls know early, that being looked at is a tool, and that the best way to disarm a girl is to make her drop her eyes by loving her too publicly when she means to do a dangerous thing. They came to Castle Black when the cold began to get inside men's clothes and then inside their thoughts. The wall soared on the horizon like a cloud that had learned to stand still. The men of the watch looked thinner than they had before, and their eyes had a strange brightness. Jeor Mormont met them with a face like old leather and a mouth that did not smile. When he saw Ned, he did not bow, but he gave a short nod that was heavier than most men's kneeling. "Your Grace," he said. "You came." "I said I would," Ned answered. Jon stood behind Mormont's shoulder, his hair curled by the cold. His mouth turned down a fraction in that way it had when he was holding his tongue against something that wanted to rush out. Ghost stood at his side with his great red eyes and his quiet dignity. Ned looked at the boy he had made and at the man the boy had made himself into. He thought of Lyanna's ribbon crushed in his hand and the way it had smelled of cedar and salt and old sorrow. He held Jon's gaze longer than he would have dared 10 years before. Jon did not look away. "Lord Stark," Jon said, and then, with a brave stab of awkward humor, "Your Grace, I do not know which to call you." "My name will do," Ned said. He could not do more with other ears around them. A man and a boy should not learn who they are while a company of soldiers shifts in boots behind them. They walked the wall. The world looked different from up there, closer to its right scale and therefore too large. On the other side, the forest breathed with a slow, patient malice. Snow lay in pockets where the sun could not reach and in stretches where the wind had decided it could not be bothered. Where the woods thinned, blue-white fields stretched so pure and calm that men's hearts hurt to look at them. Jon pointed with a gloved hand to a place where the trees had been broken as if a force had passed through them, not step by step but as a whole, a body larger than a village, pushing aside trunks like stalks of wheat. "We found the path 3 days ago," Jon said. "It comes from the far heights east of the Shadow Tower. We followed it and lost it and found it again. The men do not like to look at it. It looks like thinking. "It is thinking," Mormont said grimly. "If it is not, then I have forgotten how to be afraid of men, and I have started to be afraid of winter's tricks. And that is no way to spend old age." They made plans in a cold room that had a warmth to it anyway because Oldwood remembers fires. Stannis spread maps and Ned weighed men, and Davos listed the contents of his holds and looked mournfully at the space where there should have been 3 hogsheads of tallow and was only a crate of dull knives shipped from Oldtown by well-meaning men who would never see snow. Tyrion stood on a bench to see better and suggested a barricade made of barrels packed with sand and oil that could be fired and rolled. Hara nodded with that small competent nod of hers that said she would find the men who could be trusted not to light themselves with their own work. The Lord of Bones shouted outside the palisade to be let in, and when he was, it was without the expected glee. Even raiders lose their taste for bravado when they feel something walking in their wake that is not them. They went out beyond the wall to meet the thing that moved through the trees. There are moments when a man knows some page of himself will be written and cannot be erased. Ned felt that as he rode with ghost breath rising from the horses and the crunch of hooves the only sound in the world for a time. Robb rode to his right with his jaw set and his hands steady on his reins. Jon rode to his left with Ghost keeping time at his stirrup, and the boy had a look about him that made Ned want to both smile and weep. The very look Brandon had had when he had chosen a horse he intended to ride too hard because he had loved it too much to deny himself. Beyond them, Stannis rode with a long spear of dragonglass that looked ridiculous and ceremonial until a blue thing like a man stepped from behind a tree and turned its head and made a sound like water freezing in a clay cup. The spear shattered when it struck that thing. Dragonglass does that, but before it broke it delivered to the thing more than sharpness. It delivered an absence, a negation, something that ate at it. The thing fell away like frost retreating before flame, and there was a cry from the men behind that had in it more relief than triumph. Others came then, and with them smaller shadows that were men and had stopped being men in the way men stop being men when pride or fear eats them from the inside and leaves only shape. The woods learned the sound of dragonglass and came to hate it. The wildlings struck with a rage born of seeing their fathers stand up wrong. The men of the north struck with a determination born of the place itself. Southern men learned quickly or died. The snow rose and fell. The world erased and remade footprints until men made a path of their own by cutting their way along it. Jon killed one with a short knife that Gendry had made with his tongue stuck out the side of his mouth. He drove it into the hollow where a collarbone should be, and the thing made a sound like a crack of ice on a pond and then a more human sound that made Jon stop all motion as if he had been called by his own name as a boy. Ned grabbed his shoulder hard. "Do not listen," he said low. "Not to the thing but to the sun. That is what they do. They find an old word and use it to open you." Robb fought with a long-hafted axe in the way the Umbers liked, and his arms went from easy strength to a slow, burning work. He stopped smiling and kept fighting. Stannis' spear broke 3 times, and he took up another each time in a motion that made it seem like he had planned for breaking to be part of the tactic. Davos lost 2 fingers to a mistake with a borrowed long knife and laughed bitterly because of all the ways he had imagined losing more of his knuckles. He had not thought it would be to cold that looked like light. They held them that day and the day after, and on the 3rd day Imp Good Sense saved as many lives as bravery did, because Tyrion's barrel traps rolled down a slope slick with trampled snow, and when they burst and the oil caught, the fire grew slow and deep and did not go out when the wind tried to push it. Men learned how to aim for joints and for the place between the eyes and for the quiet fear that can make you move too slow. Arya arrived at dusk on the 3rd day as if punching her fist through a window. She slipped from under the tail of a supply cart with a grin that made her look 5 and stabbed a dead thing with her little needle and watched in amazement as it did not notice. Gendry grabbed her and pushed a dragonglass spike into her palm and said, "Try again." She did. Screamed. Arya's grin became harder. She did not look 5 anymore. When Ned saw her later, he did not scold her. He put his hand on the back of her head and closed his eyes for a breath. That night, beneath a sky that looked near enough to touch and had stars that might have been bits of the wall, Howland Reed and Bran sat in a corner of the yard and talked without moving their mouths. That was how it seemed to men who did not know better. Bran's eyes had a faraway light in them, and he blinked less than was comfortable. He told Ned later that the trees beyond the wall did not like what walked beneath them and would lend their roots to trip and their limbs to break. if men would only be wise enough to place the right feet where the trees suggested. On the fourth morning, men on the wall shouted in a voice that turned heads like a bell. Ned climbed the wooden steps to the top with the slowness of a man whose leg had chosen that day to remind him it was an old friend with old hurts. Stannis was already there, making a face like a man tasting something he cannot place. Jeor Mormont had his fist around the crenel, white-knuckled. The shape on the horizon grew and resolved and grew again until it stopped being a trick of light. The sails were meats of cream and so thin a man could almost see the sky through them. The ships were old and graceful and wrong in these waters. The banners that hung from the foremost mast were foreign to half the men on the wall and old to the other half. A red three-headed dragon on black. The ships came in stately, as if the sea itself had decided to be courtly today. Davos exhaled like a man who has set a weight down. So that's where the wind went, he said. They met Daenerys on the frozen river because Ned would not make her come inside the wall if she meant to stand in this realm at all. She stepped down from her ship as if she had been born to water and to land both. Her hair was the pale of wheat fields in winter sun. Her eyes looked like old coins from a purse not opened often. Jorah Mormont trailed her like a dog that had found a home and wasn't sure if he would be kicked. Behind them came men with thin faces and women with hard hands, and behind those came something that made men draw breath and hold it without knowing they had done so. 3 small creatures that were not small, that moved like cats and birds and lizards and fire, and that made the air around them taste like metal. She bowed to Ned with surprising grace that made no mockery of his crown or of herself. "Your Grace," she said. The words did not hurt her. She used them as a woman uses a needle, cleanly. "I was told there was a king in the west who did not like liars. There is a queen in the east who does not like thieves," Ned returned. He could feel Stannis beside him, stiffening, and he did not need to look to know that his hand hated how he was enjoying himself. "You have stolen the breath from my men." She smiled then. It was unexpected. It was affectionate. It was young and it was not cruel. "I brought it back," she said, looking past him at the frozen line of the wall. "You lost more than breath here." "We did," Ned said. "We will lose more if we do not use everything that breathes on our side." Her dragons shifted, making sounds that were not quite sounds, like the memory of bird calls. Their breath smoked. They were not the beasts of story yet. They were quick and touchable. Arya looked at them with her mouth open and her eyes shining, and Gendry looked at Arya with his mouth open and his eyes uncertain. And Sansa would later describe them to Catelyn in a letter that smelled faintly of some sweet thing Olenna had given her, and Catelyn would sit with the letter and put her hand on it as if to feel heat through parchment. They held council in the Lord Commander's quarters with the dragons exiled to a patch of snow where they curled like cats and kept one eye open. Daenerys spoke plainly. Her claim was old. Her house had been wronged. She had crossed dead places and bought her way out of chains and bled for strangers. She had not come to put a crown on the first head that asked for it. But she had heard, and men she trusted had told her that the man who had taken the law into his hands had done it to put it back down in the place it belonged. And she could see that men moved around him as men move around a fire that will not burn them if they stand at the right distance. "You could take Dragonstone," Stannis said bluntly. "You could take it with the force you have at your back and the beasts you brought with you." "I could," she agreed, and her glance at him was not unkind, which irritated him more than scorn would have. "What would I do with it? Sit and look at the sea and tell my children stories about a world that burned before I was born? I bring a little fire to a place asked for it. I can help you hold the line. I am not here to steal back rocks." "You will ask something," Ned said. "Ask it. I would rather know the cost when I have the coin in hand." She studied him, and the study was intelligent and alert and unafraid. "When the dead are dead," she said, "you will let my house be more than a tale told to frighten unpleasant men. I will not take the iron chair you have nailed into a seat with law. But you will let me name my house again and give it a place at the table that is not the place set for beggars." "I will," Ned said. "Dragonstone will be yours, not as a challenge but as a promise. I will write it with my hand and Stannis will seal it." Stannis did not move. It hurt him. He did it. "Done," he said. and the word fell onto the table like a weight. They cut the dead with fire and glass and light and fury. Dragons can make snow melt. They can also make it run and then freeze again slick under boots, and that killed as many men as Bern did. Daenerys learned quickly. She moved with a lightness that made heavy men grin and then shut their mouths. Her beasts learned quicker, and if they took a foolish bite now and then at the wrong thing, they remembered the taste and did not try twice. Bran wove ravens into confusion screens that made blue things move where they should not have. Howland Reed laid fires and hollowed out drifts with oil that would not die. Arya killed a thing whose hands were wrong and afterward could not stop singing under her breath for a day, as if the song were a spell that kept her from feeling afraid. Ghost took the throats of 2 that had thought to take Jon's back. Jon broke 4 blades on things that had the shape of men and did not die the right way. He learned to aim not for the throat but for the place behind the eyes and for the moment when the air around a thing was coldest. On a night when the sky had gone black and the stars had fled to hide their eyes, the Pale King came. It was not a man. It was what a man would look like if winter had eaten his flesh and worn the bones as ornaments. It walked with the weightless step of a cat. It looked like patience. When it turned its head, the world around its face cracked. Men who had thought themselves brave cried out like children. Robb bit his knuckle until blood came and then lifted his axe. And the sound the weapon made when he tried to swing it through the thing's sword was like glass breaking on stone. Ned stepped between his sons because there is a moment when a father's body is only a tool, and he will break it to make another tool out of the breaking. The Pale King lifted its blade. Its blade was not a thing mortal men should look at for long. Stannis struck at its sword arm with a broken spear bound with iron bands to help it hold its brittle strength. The spear shattered, and the iron bands wrapped like a whip around the pale thing's wrist. Davos hurled a dragonglass mace that he had made by tying shards to a stick, and the mace broke against a tree and showered the thing in black glints that sank into it and made a sound like a man inhaling wrong. Jon leapt forward without thinking like a boy and with all the thought in the world like a man and drove his knife into the thing's eye. It did not die. It reeled. It hated. It looked at Jon the way hunger looks at a table. It raised its blade again. Ned did not think. He did not count the steps. He did not consider his leg. He raised ice. He felt the old comfort of that weight, the honesty of it. He stepped and stepped again, and the ground under him tried to lie and tell him he could not measure it, and he made it tell him the truth by putting his foot where it had to be, not where it wished. He brought the blade down as Stannis's broken iron bands pulled the Pale King's arm a fraction lower, and Jon's knife held its gaze that small terrible moment longer. The sword met the neck. For a breath the world tried to say that this would not work, that stories had lied, that winter was a god and would not bleed. Then ice bit. It bit so cleanly that for a moment Ned thought he had missed, that the blade had gone through nothing. The head toppled. The body froze where it stood and then fell as if that had been its plan all along. There was a sound like the smallest crack running all the way out to the horizon. In the moment after it, men realized they were still alive and made a noise men make when they do not know whether to laugh or be sick. Ned tasted bile and iron. He held the sword and felt a weight leave his arms that he would not have admitted to carrying. The fight did not end with the Pale King's fall, because nothing in the north ends so simply. But it changed. The things that came after it came with a little less intent. They came like the tail of a beast whose head has been cut off and has not yet learned it is dead. Men held out their hands into the dark and recognized what their fingers closed upon. They became a line. They became a wall. They became what stories had always pretended to be true. Men together. When morning came gray and grudging, there were more men alive than a wise man would have bet upon. There were fewer dead than a foolish man would have feared. There was snow trampled down into shapes that made no sense until men remembered that they had been in those shapes the night before and had not had time to consider how ugly they were. After, in a room where the fire had sulked through the worst of the night and was now growing up a little, Ned sat with Jon and with Howland Reed. He put Lyanna's ribbon on the table. He did not play at ceremony. He did not clear his throat. He said the thing he had promised to say so long ago that his bones had felt themselves carved with it. He told Jon who his mother had been and the promise that had grown around his life like a hedge. He told him what love had done and what duty had done and where those had not been the same thing and how he had chosen. Jon did not leap to his feet or swear or weep. He sat as still as winter. Ghost laid his muzzle on Jon's knee and sighed as if he had been waiting for this breath a long time and could at last release it. At last the boy, no, the man, looked up. His eyes had something in them that would make them darker in some lights and lighter in others ever after. He spoke slowly because he had learned to hold words and weigh them. "Thank you," he said. I thought I wanted to know so that I could leave being who I am. Now I know so that I can choose to stay being who I am. The wall is where I belong. The Night's Watch gives me a name that does not take anything from a man I love. I will be Jon Snow and Ned Stark's son and Lyanna's son, and if someone someday wants to sing about me, they can learn all those names and do the work of making the tune fit them. He gave a small smile. It looked like him and like someone else. But I hope no one sings. You will be sung, Howland Reed said dryly. You killed a thing that will be remembered in the way men remember what they name their children after. Names are cheap, Jon said, and there was a little of Stannis in him now. I will take more men. I will take grain. I will send letters to the south that do not speak of glory. They will speak of roofs that do not leak and sleeves that do not rot when you sweat. We will keep the wall because it is the thing keeping the rest of the realm from having to learn the kind of songs I do not like. Good, Ned said simply. There were tears in his eyes. He did not scrub them away. They burned what needed burning. They piled stones over what could not be burned. The wildlings drifted south in a kind of bewilderment and found there were men who would trade with them if they did not spear first. Mance Rayder sent a letter composed for him by a man who had once been a singer and now had a voice that cracked in the cold. It was the sort of letter a king would write if a king had lived without a crown for a long time and had learned that hats keep your head as warm. Ned made a compact with him that would have shocked the boy he had been. He gave the free folk a strip of land along the lakes where fishing was good, and in return they gave to the Watch 40 boys who were given warm clothes and knives with a dull side for the one hand and a sharp side for the other. And those boys turned into men who did not die in the cold because they knew how to make fire without flint and because they were stubborn enough to hold a wall when men behind them shouted foolish things. When they went south again, the snow had begun to melt in the ruts of the road, and the horses stepped carefully. Men talked of the ice as if it were a creature they had met and wanted to describe to their wives without frightening them. Daenerys sailed east to Dragonstone because a promise had been made and kept, and her dragons sat on the castle's black shoulders as if the stone had been cut for them in a time men have chosen to forget. She wrote to Ned with a hand that had learned to be crisp and gracious, and she signed as Lady of Dragonstone and daughter of a house that had learned a little not to eat itself. Tywin came to King's Landing at last, not with an army but with a household that might as well have been one. He had not liked the winter and felt that the winter had not liked him. He was older and it showed on him only in the way he spoke. The iron in him had cooled a degree. He met with Ned in the council chamber with the shutters flung open so that the sea could hear and the air could come and go. You have what you wanted, Tywin said. He did not bother to define it. You have a kingdom made of law and bread. You have a north that thinks well of you. You have a west that thinks less poorly than it might. You have a daughter who is very nearly the sort of woman who will ruin a man if he does not deserve to be saved by her. My daughter would like me to poison you. I will not. I cannot afford the cost of losing the world I have learned to live in. You have what you wanted, Ned returned. Your house has not been shamed to rubble. Your grandson lives. He will not be king. He will be Lord of Casterly Rock when you are gone, and if he has sense he will marry a woman who laughs at him and saves his life by doing so. Your men did not die for an outlaw. Your gold bought a peace that will last long enough to teach boys to be men without the sound of trumpets ruining the lesson. Do not pretend altruism to me, Tywin said. You like the taste of your victories. Do not feign that it is bread alone you crave. Ned smiled. A small thing like a man showing a coin with a nick in it. I like the taste of sleep. If I like the taste of anything else, I am learning to have it in small bites. They made a charter then that read like something a monk might have wept over. It did a small thing and then another and then another. It did not disband the small council when it had grown too fat. It put a knife on the table within reach of the hand. It did not promise that kings would be good. It gave to the realm a way to bring its weight to bear if a king forgot that a crown is heavier than a man can carry alone. Promised that bread would be bought before banners. It promised that men sent to the wall would not be sent there for little grudges but only for big sins or for choice, and that those who chose would not be sneered at by the men with softer winters in their bones. It made space in the law for things that had been squeezed out by men who liked their lines straight. It gave to the free folk citizenship if they could prove they had not killed without law south of the wall for a span of years. It named Daenerys Lady of Dragonstone by right and not by whim and asked of her oaths that were not small, and she gave them. Cersei left the city as a queen without a crown. She went to Casterly Rock with a train of wagons that rattled like a song. Joffrey sat inside a carriage whose curtains were tied open. He sneered at the crowds who did not sneer back because they had bread in their bellies and did not need to give their fear to a boy to chew for them. Myrcella went with her and looked back with tears on her cheeks because she had learned to like the gardens south of the Red Keep and the women who laughed there. And Tommen went and looked forward, where the road made a pretty line. Tyrion stayed in King's Landing because he had learned to like the smell of ink and because Hara liked him more than she pretended, and because Stannis had discovered that a man who insulted him honestly in council did not need a head as big as his wit. Sansa married Willis Tyrell in a hall that smelled of roses and roast, and where the musicians were told firmly not to play the songs about queens who died while trying to give birth to princes. Willis's hands were gentle and not soft. He had learned to live with the pain his leg gave him, and he had learned not to make his pain anyone else's problem. Olenna cried and then pretended she hadn't. Sansa did not cry. She smiled in a way that told Ned things were as he had hoped and that she had choices left inside her and that she would make them. Arya did not attend because she had gone with Howland Reed to the Neck to learn to move through water that looks like land and to talk to frogs in a language that would have made Septa Mordain write her 1,000 lines about propriety if God had not had the good sense to make the Septa too old to read what she could not stand to see. Bran grew into a boy who sat longer than he walked and whose eyes went sometimes not blank but too full. He sent letters with little drawings in the margins that meant things only his father and Reed could be sure they had read right. He spoke of crows who were friends and of trees that remembered. He spoke of a wolf with eyes all colors at once. Rickon learned not to bite men when he was angry, and that is harder to teach than a southerner would imagine. The Iron Islands muttered and Dee then settled, because Yara Greyjoy was quicker in the head than her father and smarter in the ways that do not announce themselves by shouting. She came to King's Landing in a boat with a figurehead of a woman whose face was a little like her own and offered ships to patrol the northern coast in exchange for the right to cut a forest on the mainland and plant it again with trees that would grow straight arrow shafts for 100 years after she died. Ned took her hand and made the bargain and later sat with Theon on a bench looking at the sea. The boy looked as if someone had taken his skin off and had not remembered where they put it. "I thought I would hate you forever," Theon said. "You made it hard." "I meant to," Ned said. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Some things should be hard." Years became a rope of days men could pull on when the wind took them. They did not break often. When they did, the net Catelyn had shown him how to mend held. Winter came in a way that even southern men remembered to respect, and it did not kill as many as the last had. Men with old scars learned that they could lay their hands on warm stone and find in it not relief only but gratitude. The wall did not fall. Men wrote letters north and received them. A little boy with hair like ashen eyes like a storm cloud was born to Daenerys on Dragonstone and was given a name with too many syllables in it. When Sansa visited, she cradled him and called him a littler name until he fell asleep and the dragon curled on the window ledge made a sound that might have been approval. A year later, a girl was born to Willis and Sansa in Highgarden, and her laugh made people turn their heads when they heard it because it sounded like a bell rung in fresh air on a new morning. Ned sat the Iron Throne to hear petitions as rarely as he could because it made him feel, in his bones, the stupid weight that had been welded into that ugly chair. He sat instead in a plain carved oaken seat in a hall that had been whitewashed and scented with rosemary and heard people who were not sure first how to address a man who did not look like a statue when he listened. He rode to Stony September to settle a land dispute with a shepherd who turned out to be better at sums than the lord who swore against him. He rode to the twins when Walder Frey died at last out of spite and age in equal shares, and watched his brood argue like litters of pups. He sent a letter to the Aerie that was sharper than he had intended when he read that Lisa had locked herself in her room and refused to see her own son. Bronzion Royce sent a letter back that said only, "We have this now," and Ned let go a breath he had not noticed he was holding. He went often to Winterfell. He could not bear to be long away from the sound the wind made there. The Godswood did not mind that he wore a crown back and forth like a boy carrying a heavy pail for someone else. He would sit beneath the heart tree and let the smell of wet earth and the music of the pool rinse his thoughts. Catelyn would sit with him sometimes, and sometimes she would walk in the house and put a hand on a wall and remind it of its duty, because stones need reminding. Robb would ride in with snow in his hair and a pleasure in his face he could not hide. He married Jane Poole quietly and surprised everyone, including himself, by being happy about it more often than not. He sent men to the Bar-Rollins to repair old tombs and said nothing when the songs that grew from it credited him with a superstition he did not exactly hold. When he was older, and Grey threaded his beard in a way that made him look like his father even to men who had not known Ricard, he called a great council in the dragon pit again, though there were no dragons now sitting in its shadows. He spoke not of crowns but of winters. He spoke of what the first long night had done and of how this one had been kept short, not because men were brave, though they were, but because men had been careful. He asked lords to plant trees and to build mills where mills could be built and to make roads that were not meant to carry armies but grain. He made a speech not in the ringing way of kings who love the sound of their voices, but in the practical way of men who have discovered that a modest timetable is a firm friend. Men nodded and agreed. The world does not always need a shout. Sometimes it ends with a shrug and a good ledger. On a late autumn day when the wind had turned and was coming down from the north again, he stood on the parapet at Winterfell with Arya at his side. She had become a woman in the way that leaves become brown. Not all at once, but in a steady change that you only see when you look back. She wore a knife at her hip that had a hilt wrapped in old leather and a blade that had been oiled so carefully it had become a habit. Her hair was shorter than Sansa liked and longer than Hara the Willow had told her was sensible. She had a scar at her temple where a man in the neck had taught her that even if you win a fight, you do not leave it without being marked. Below them, boys threw snow at one another, and one of them fell down and the others helped him up and laughed, and the sound made Ned's throat ache. "You'll go again," he said. It was not a question. "I will," Arya said. "The world is bigger than our house and smaller too. I will go and I will come back, and both will feel like the right thing." He nodded. "Bring me a story I have not heard." She grinned, pointed to his chest with one gloved finger. "Keep me a house that does not fall down while I'm gone." "I will," he said. In the evening, he walked to the Godswood alone. Snow began to fall as he came beneath the first branches. It fell in the old quiet way that had taught him more about patience than any man had. He knelt before the heart tree. He had stopped asking it questions. It had never answered him. That had been the lesson. He lay his hand on the roots that ran lick, the old veins through the ground. He felt tired, and the tiredness had a satisfaction in it, as the tiredness of a man who has hung a door in winter and made it true and knows that the wind will not find a way through it. He thought of Robert and Jon Arryn and of Lyanna, and he did not wince the way he had once done when he put all those names in one room. They had made their peace with one another inside him. He thought of Cersei and of the look she had given him the last time she had seen him, a look not of hatred but of late comprehension. "You had never wanted to humiliate me, you had only wanted to stop me." He thought of Tywin and the letter Tyrion had brought after the old lion's death, written in the plain hand of a man who knows his limits, saying that he would hold the rock with both hands and try to sit straighter than his father had. He thought of Stannis making a life out of law in a way that broadened the law until it could hold more than one person's will. Of Davos, 10 fingers no more and no less than the gods had deemed right for him, finding his son's laughter in a free city where no one had thought to see it. Of Daenerys on the black stone sending him a letter with a traced childish hand at the bottom and a dragon's print like a smudge of ink. He closed his eyes and breathed in a world that had not burned. He heard the small lake whisper. He felt snow melt on his eyelids. When he opened his eyes again, Catelyn stood there, and he realized he had known she was coming by the sound of leaves not stirring just so. "You always come when it starts to snow," she said. "I like to see if I remember how it falls," he said. She smiled in that way that had not changed since the first time he had kissed her. "Do you?" "Some years I do," he answered. "This year I think I do." They went back to the hall with their arms around one another like young people, though they were not. The table was already set. Rob was carving and telling Rickon he was cutting too close to the bone. Sansa was shaking her head at Willis because he had put too much salt on something, laughing as she did so. Bran was frowning over a piece of wood he had taken to whittling because it made his hands feel useful when his mind had flown farther than the walls. Arya had not said she was leaving yet, but the look in her eyes said she would soon, and that was as it should be. Jon's letter lay in Ned's pocket, the newest one, and it talked of an ice cave that sang when men spoke inside it, and of crows that had learned to ignore a man's laughter, and of a new boy at the wall who would either be a commander one day or a story parents tell their sons about the limits of courage. It made Ned smile. They ate. The candles burned. Outside, the snow thickened and the world went quieter, as if it wanted this noise to stand alone in it for a time. Ned raised his cup and did not make a speech. He looked at the faces around him and let the warmth move through his fingers into the wood. He did not think of thrones. He did not think of crowns. He thought of the work that would come tomorrow and of the bread that would be baked that day and eaten the next. He thought of a wall held up by men on both sides and of a promise kept and of another one he would keep tomorrow. Later, when the hall had emptied and the fires had gone to coals, he stepped out into the courtyard. Snow lay in a good honest depth upon the stones. He lifted a handful and squeezed it and felt it compress, felt it give way, felt it hold. He let it fall and looked up. The sky was close. The air was his. He drew in a breath that filled his chest in that satisfying way a man only learns to notice when he has stood for long years in rooms where the air is staler than it should be. Somewhere a dire wolf howled, and another answered, and another. The sound lifted the hair on his arms beneath his clothes and made the roof timbers seem to shiver with pleasure. Ned Stark, who had been a boy and a brother and a lord and a friend and a father and a king, stood in his yard while snow fell, and he felt, with a humility that was not humiliation, that the house he had been given to keep was kept. The realm would fail again someday, because men do and because winter always returns and because law must be set right as regularly as a man's jaw after a hard blow. Someone else would sit in his place and try their hand at the balance. That was not despair. It was a promise the world had made to itself, that it would go on. He went inside at last, because even in the north there is such a thing as standing in snow too long. He banked the fire with a practiced hand and took off his boots and put them neatly beneath the bench because he had learned to be tidy in small things when the large cannot be made so. He lay down with the woman he had chosen and who had chosen him back. Sleep took him as it sometimes did. Swiftly, without argument, like a friend who has waited at the door and now comes inside. When the morning came, it did not come with warning. It came with light at the edge of the shutters and the sound of someone on the stairs and the thin chorus of children in the kitchen telling the hounds to wait their turn. He rose and went down to the day. He did not think of endings because the great ones are always only new beginnings told from another angle. He thought of bread and law and patience and steel. He thought, as he had taught himself to each day, of what could be done before night. And as he walked into the hall, as he nodded to the men who rose and then sat, and as he took his place at the end of the board as he had always preferred, he felt the old words not as warning but as a truth too big to fear. Winter is coming, the words said, as they always had. He looked out the window at the snow falling in quiet sheets, and in them he saw not a threat but a promise that if men held steady the world would be held also. Winter is coming and we are ready.